All right. So to take us through our agenda today, we are going to start with a brief overview of the California Fish Passage Forum. After that, we're going to hear from several different federal and state funding opportunities with a focus on availability of funds in fiscal year 2024, 2025, and beyond. I'm going to take us through a few funding databases that you can use to find multiple opportunities at once. We're going to hear from representatives of NOAA NMFS, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Bureau of Reclamation, CDFW, and California Department of Water Resources. After that, we'll have a lunch break, and then in the afternoon, we are going to move on to the resources portion of the webinar. That will include a talk from the Environmental Policy Innovation Center and some information on putting together cost share packages, exploring your options for simplified permitting. And then we're going to hear from some folks from the North Coast Salmon Project about the SHARP program. And finally, about some monitoring being done in Prairie Creek from, yes, we're going to hear about some monitoring Prairie Creek, and then we're going to try to wrap up before 2 p.m. So to start us off, a lot of this information is not going to be new to many of you. The California Fish Passage Forum, as Sandy mentioned, we're here to protect and revitalize anadromous fish populations by restoring connectivity of freshwater habitats throughout their historic range. We accomplish this through the combined work of our partners, which include NMFS and U.S. Forest Service and U.S. Wildlife Service. We also partner with Pacific States Marine Fisheries Commission, who provides us fiscal management services as well as GIS and data management. We also work closely with California Department of Fish and Wildlife and Department of Water Resources, California State Parks, Coastal Conservancy, and our nonprofit members, Trout Unlimited and California Trout. We have 7 strategic objectives. Those include the direct funding of removal and remediation work through an annual funding opportunity, which I'll talk about a little later. One of our main goals is improve collaboration and information sharing of our different agencies and organizations to leverage the combined knowledge of our different signatories. A goal is also to collate and elevate resources for practitioners. This webinar helps achieve and advance that goal. Increasing access to simplified permitting options through the work of partner organizations, and outreaching the success of fish passage restoration across our geographic scope and places where more work is needed. We are a nationally recognized fish habitat partnership under the umbrella of the National Fish Habitat Partnership, NFHAP. We also work closely with other fish habitat partnerships you may have heard of in the past. Those include the Pacific Marine and Estuary Partnership, as well as the Pacific Lamprey Conservation Initiative. For anybody interested in our work and wants to take a deeper dive into our strategic plan, it is available on our website, which is cafishpassageforum.org. Actually, it's cafishpassage.org. My apologies, my link there is not correct, but if you Google California Fish Passage Forum, you will reach us. Some of our work includes the funding of actually over 57 projects now that we are into our next round of support. That number is a little over 60 now. We've supported over 60 projects, which include barrier removals and remediations, assessment work, outreach activities, and research. That has resulted in over 50 barriers removed and over 300 increased miles of habitat access for anadromous target species. And we've directed almost $2 million in NFHAP funding and over $12 million in leveraged funding to support those projects. Some of our past work includes a partnership with the Pacific Lamprey Conservation Initiative and PMEP to explore the barriers to tidal connectivity across the West Coast. That's available on our website. We do have a few events coming up that I wanted to highlight. For those of you who attended the Passage Assessment Database Expert Review webinar for Region 2 in March, you will be excited to hear that we do have a date for the Region 1 webinar that's going to be on Wednesday, May 15th from 10 to 12. And at that event, we will be utilizing fish passage experts from the Region 1 coastal areas, including Del Norte, Humboldt, and Mendocino counties, to review records of passage barriers in Region 1 in the Passage Assessment Database. We also have an event coming up for World Fish Migration Day, Friday, May 24th. We are going to be hosting a virtual trivia and happy hour. I feel like this could be a really fun opportunity for a few people from your office to get together, and we'll be doing a short team trivia. I'll be putting together questions ranging from species taxonomy, dam removal, restoration history, and the like, and we can have a soft start to our weekend by testing our knowledge and celebrating all the work that's been done. Some of our other work includes partnering with Ross Taylor and Associates to develop a comprehensive analysis of fish passage monitoring methods across the state, and developing a kind of quick worksheet to test barrier performance, barrier removal performance for fish passage pre and post implementation. We also periodically have meetings where we do invite people from the restoration industry to join us. That includes our most recent meeting in Santa Rosa last November, which included a field tour of the Yellow Jacket Creek project, which is, I believe, the longest continuous stretch of boulder weirs in the area, which is still functioning very well. One of our main data products, which you have likely heard about, is the Passage Assessment Database. This is an ongoing and actively maintained map-based inventory of known and potential barriers to fish passage. This is going through a comprehensive QA/QC process, which is part of the expert review webinar process. And this can be used by restoration practitioners to both identify and take information from the pad, but you can also upload information to the pad about barriers that are in areas that you may be working. It's available on CalFish and also available via the forum website. We do have also a barrier optimization tool called FishPass that uses the passage assessment database to account for the spatial layout of barriers in a particular watershed and stream network, and assesses cumulative barrier passability, the potential for opening upstream habitat, and if fed the proper input information that can generate an estimate of potential treatment costs. In 2020, we worked with Ross Taylor and Associates to apply this optimization tool to the Smith River watershed, where we assessed hundreds of potential barriers and used FishPass to generate a priority list for the barriers that would generate the most habitat or be the most advantageous to remove. FishPass works best when it is tailored to a particular watershed, and so we are hoping to partner with organizations or agencies or RCDs, whoever has a multi-barrier assessment that they are hoping to work on that is limited to a particular watershed or region and is looking for some additional data options to help justify your prioritization lists. If you're interested, contact info@cafishpassageforum.org. You can also find our contact information on the website, and we would love to hear from you to help advance and help your assessments move along. As I mentioned earlier, the forum does have a direct funding opportunity. We fund about $250,000 to $350,000 a year in annual funding from the National Fish Habitat Partnership. We hope to use that money to fund several different projects per year. And as such, we hope to fund projects in the amount from generally $20,000 to $100,000, and then leverage additional funding through a non-federal match. So it does include a one-to-one non-federal match requirement. Because of this, it could be a good source of cost share for funding for cost increases due to inflation, monitoring, assessment, and if you need to leverage some additional funds, we can be a good source of funding for that. The funding opportunity releases each spring. It's closed for this year, but it will open again next, probably either fall of 2024 or spring of 2025. There are other sources of funding available for fish passage work, of course, which we're going to hear about in a little bit. I wanted to highlight a useful tool called the Interagency Fish Passage Portal. This is something developed by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in partnership with many of the federal agencies who received funding from Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and Inflation Reduction Act. That is available. If you Google Interagency Fish Passage Portal, you'll find a lot of the different federal funding opportunities that are available to fund your project. I also wanted to highlight a few funding databases that you can use to find multiple opportunities at once. The Klamath Basin Integrated Fisheries Restoration and Monitoring Plan developed a spreadsheet of funding opportunities that could be used to further the work in the Klamath. This has not been updated since spring of 2023, so a lot of these have been closed. However, it does contain a lot of information and can be a good starting point. So you can find that by Googling the Integrated Fisheries Restoration and Monitoring Plan funding. You can also find it with this URL I've attached to the slide here. This is what that spreadsheet looks like. Apologize for the quick scroll, just showing you how many funding opportunities are on there. It does include the source, description, who can apply, match requirements, whether or not those solicitations are open or closed, and points of contact. So if you're looking for a bunch of funding opportunities at once that really vary in scope, size, and type, this can be a good place to get you started. San Francisco Bay Joint Venture also has a similar funding spreadsheet. You can access that at sfbayjv.org/funding. Here's a look at their funding spreadsheet. It includes the name, what area it's from, categories of types of projects, when the grant info was last updated, whether or not there's a match requirement, and points of contact as well. I've noticed that this one does tend to be more reliably maintained, so it is pretty up to date. You can access it at the URL down at the bottom. These are also linked in the attendees packet you received this morning, as well as the one that I put in the chat. It's the same document. Finally, I wanted to highlight a GIS-based tool developed by the Puget Sound Partnership called the RAFT tool, Recovery Acceleration Funding Tool. And this is an interesting tool. It is maintained and funded by the U.S. Well, it's maintained by Puget Sound Partnership, but it's funded by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And this is helpful because it is searchable. So here's a look at using that. It's got quite a bit of information about each funding opportunity, where to access information, how to sign up for their mailing list, and it is automatically filtered to only show active and open funding opportunities. You can search by the name of the fund, whether it's federal or non-federal. These are some of the federal opportunities on there right now. You can search by the activity type, the match requirement, and who is eligible. At the top, you can also go up to active and closed funding opportunities. Clicking on more info for each funding opportunity takes you to their website. And while that is obviously more tailored to the Puget Sound region, that can be a helpful jumping off point because it does include other federal opportunities as well. So that segues us well into our next agenda item. We're actually running about 5 minutes ahead of schedule, which is like a miracle. So I would love to just open it up briefly for any questions that you guys have regarding the forum, what I've discussed today so far. Feel free to just use the chat. So I'll give us about 5 minutes for any questions that we have. Since this is a webinar, attendees are prevented from using your camera or microphone. However, I do encourage interaction in the chat because I do want us to be able to chat and talk to each other. So if you have any questions about what I've presented so far, feel free to just pop that in the chat and we'll move on and hear from our federal funding opportunities to start here in about 5 minutes. Ooh, good question, James. James asked if the links to the Ross Taylor reports are in the attendees package. The direct links to the reports are not. However, you can get to them by the California Fish Passage Forum website. That would have been a good thing to include, Jim. I'm sorry I didn't do that. If you go to the website and go to monitoring methods and guidelines, those reports are found right in there, downloadable directly from the website. Does anybody else have any questions? Question from Jocelyn as to whether or not I'm going to provide the slides for future reference. Yes, I will. I'm gonna stitch together the entire presentation, including my presentation and the presentations from our panelists today. I'll stitch those all together and publish them on the California Fish Passage Forum website. And that will be available by this afternoon. I try to get it done same day. I just wanna get it done while it's fresh. Thank you, great question. I guess I've got one question for the group. Since I'm putting together this virtual happy hour and trivia for World Fish Migration Day, has anybody been to a fish themed trivia, and especially a virtual trivia? I would love to know how it went. Question from Jack Sanchez about helping with Auburn Ravine. Jack, I would recommend that being here and making the connections with people in various agencies and fish passage focused nonprofits is exactly the right place to start. So being here today and making those connections is great. I would recommend that we help connect you with some folks at probably, I would recommend likely CDFW, but let's connect you with some agency folks to talk more specifically about advancing work on Auburn Ravine. I think that's a good idea. If anybody has been to a virtual fishy themed trivia at some point in the chat, I'd love to hear if it went well. Okay, I say that we move to our next agenda item. We'll be hearing from our federal opportunities first, and then moving on to some of our state opportunities. Our first panelist today is Ruth Goodfield of NOAA National Marine Fisheries Service, who's going to talk to us about the funding opportunities available from NOAA. Ruth, are you on the chat? Are you ready to go?
I sure am. Thanks, Holly. Go ahead and start the slideshow whenever you're ready.
I can do that.
Terrific. Thanks, Holly, for putting this together and for driving these slideshows for us. This is a great webinar, so much appreciated. So I'm Ruth Goodfield. I work for the NOAA Restoration Center. I'm here part of the California team, and I work in the Central Valley. We have folks spread throughout the anadromous waters of California, and so we're here. We are here to offer technical assistance. We are here to offer some expedited permitting for restoration projects. And we're also here to talk about our funding opportunities that we have. So we normally have a funding opportunity that we have had for 30 years or so, and that is called the Community-Based Restoration Program. But I think, as Sandy mentioned, there's a kind of this generational funding opportunity that has come up through BIL and through IRA. And so I'm going to really focus on those. So go ahead and next slide, please. And then maybe I'll apologize really quickly. You saw on the first slide that it's dated September 2023. We have to use our set slideshows, so which is fine. And we also are currently, our NOFOs are closed, our funding opportunities are closed. We just finished round 2 of this 5-year funding source, and those are currently in review. So that's why I don't have a new slideshow to share with you. So again, we've been doing this for over 30 years. NOAA has a long history of supporting our partners. And we right now have unprecedented opportunities through funding to really hopefully help move that needle for fisheries restoration throughout the nation and here in California. Next slide, please. And so you heard me talk about our community-based restoration program that we have and we have had for a long, long time. That is very limited funding, and we have, a few $1,000,000 that we have to spread throughout the nation annually. So this has been quite an injection of funds that we've had here in the last couple of years through BIL and IRA, approximately almost $1 billion for 5 years, and this started 2 years ago. So our first year we did really well. We spent, well, I have some numbers coming up here. So there will be at least 3 rounds of funding competitions through this particular opportunity. We have 4 opportunities included in this funding program, and we have fish passage, general public fish passage, tribal fish passage, transformational habitat restoration, and tribal and underserved communities. And I'll kind of go over those a little bit. I'm really going to focus on the fish passage opportunities. Next slide, please. Okay, so now this one's a little wonky because we already closed round 2, but it's a good opportunity to kind of go over some of these things. Just really quickly, we have our 4 competitions that I talked about: National Fish Passage, Tribal Fish Passage, Transformational Habitat Restoration, which is really kind of your classic habitat restoration, in-stream work, riparian work, those sorts of that sorts of thing. Then we have habitat restoration for tribes and underserved communities, and I'll get into that a little bit because that's a really interesting funding opportunity that we have available right now. And then I'll just mention here, round 2, I mentioned that it closed. we have available this year, we're going to spend close to $500 million over the 4 NOFOs just for round 2. And I mention that because that's just amazing to have that kind of money available. I've never seen it. I've been doing this work for a long, long time. And it's wonderful. And we're seeing amazing projects get on the ground. I want to mention that we had over $3.5 billion requested. So the need is greater than what we have. And I just want to, vote and vote often. We need these kinds of bills. We need this kind of legislators need to understand how important fisheries restoration and coastal resilience is. So I'll just get off my soapbox there. So, and just again here, the address to learn more about all of these funding opportunities is there at the bottom of the slide. And I think I have it a couple more times in here. So next slide, please. Okay, so now we're going to kind of get into a little bit more of the nuts and bolts. And this is our National Fish Passage Program. And this is an old slide, please forgive me. I don't know how much is going to be available this next round. I don't know when the next round will be. We will have a third round, undoubtedly, and it will be either this 25 or 26. I'm not quite sure. Just the crystal ball is murky. They're still figuring all that out. So a lot of this information is no good to you. But I will talk about eligibility and some of the bones that go with this. This is a very broadly eligibility. Anyone is basically eligible other than federal agencies. State agencies, for-profits, nonprofits, tribes, come on down, belly on up to the bar. Everybody is here, and we're happy to have you. Please bring us good projects. Next slide. So then we have Tribal Fish Passage, which is a really interesting one. And this is money that's available to support tribal fish passage work and build tribal organizational capacity. This is limited to federally recognized tribes, tribal organizations, and Alaska Native corporations. Everything else is open to everybody, including non-federally recognized tribes, which I know is really a sticky point here in California where we have so many non-federally recognized tribes. Next slide. And then here, this is our 4th funding opportunity. And I took out the transformational slide because I really wanted to focus on fish passage. And I did mention that we have that classic restoration also. So here is a kind of a one-off, and this is for tribes and underserved communities. And this is truly a capacity building kind of a thing. We really want to be able to, NOAA would like to really be able to meet communities that are underserved and tribal communities that are underserved and where they are and where you are and where we can be most helpful to get you started on a path you want to be on. And hopefully that's a restoration path. But really that's something to kind of discuss together. And we really want to be partnering with folks. We want to take this environmental justice very seriously. And so we are here to meaningfully engage with folks. And I just wanted to say that. So that's a really neat, different funding opportunity that we have available. Next slide. And this just kind of goes into what I just said. So again, we're really looking to help build capacity, support good science that is actionable, and help with on-the-ground restoration. Next slide. Okay, and here we are. To get in touch and learn more, here's the website again, address. We will have updated webinars when we have our next opportunity open up. In the meantime, all this information is available on the website. Just look under all funding opportunities and you can find this. And all the links are available. And I think that's it. We'll see if there's a next page. No. Okay, so thank you very much. And I know it was very general, but that's fine. I want you to know that what it is available, and also if you are on this mailing list, you will get an email when our next funding opportunity opens up.
Thank you, Ruth. I really appreciate it. And thank you for going through and, mentioning that that we're closed for now, but there will be more. A purpose of this webinar today, since we have so many different opportunities that are in many different stages of being open, being closed, being in development, we did want to provide a overview of everything. We didn't want to leave anyone out, even if that funding opportunity is closed for the year. So that's part of the reason why we're presenting both open and closed opportunities. So I've got a few, we do have some time for questions. I've got some questions for Ruth from the chat. From Garrett Altman at Epic, curious if the NOAA tribal fish passage and habitat restoration for tribes and underserved communities are limited to tribes along the coast or with a coastal connection, or can interior tribes and communities apply?
Yeah, great question, Garrett. And we are looking at coastal tribes. This is a anadromous fisheries focused. We're focused on our NOAA trust species. So that would be an answer to that.
Thank you, Ruth. Question from Joanna. Does Ruth know when round 2 decisions will be made?
They are being made as we speak for some of the NOFOs. I know that fish passage is being in its final review. So we should be hearing word about general national fish passages very soon. Other ones will be coming out. We should be hearing about all of them by the end of June. Word should be coming out.
Thank you, Ruth. And then Garrett, I believe I cut you off. I'm sorry if you wanted to respond to Ruth directly. Go ahead. If not, that's just fine too. Question from Jack Sanchez. Are you working with Larry on the grant to get fish over Gold Hill Dam?
I have not talked with Larry here recently, Jack, but I will be talking soon. Always happy to talk with folks in the Auburn Ravine watershed.
Thank you, Ruth. Does anyone else have questions for Ruth regarding her presentation? I have one, actually. Ruth, how much, from rounds 1 or round 2, how much demand did you have for the tribal capacity building, the tribal fish passage project?
It's pretty fantastic, actually. We've had a great response. Again, way more need than we have, even with this influx of dollars. So yeah, I have to say personally, I love the opportunity to be able to work with some of our tribal partners more closely.
I'm sure, Ruth, that must
very
be
enriching.
Yeah, that must feel really good. Thank you. Yeah, that's great to hear that the demand and the need is there. All right, we're going to move on to our next funding opportunity. Give me one moment. All right, let's share. All right, our next funder that we're going to hear from is Tim Liu with the Tim Lux, sorry, Tim, with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Tim, are you on the call?
I certainly am. Thanks, Holly. Thanks for having me.
Go for it.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here. I want to spend time doing and getting to know everybody on the call, but for those folks, especially the ones I don't know. I am the coordinator for the National Fish Habitat Action Plan for the Region 8 for the Fish and Wildlife Service. So that means that I cover California, Nevada, and the Klamath Basin of Oregon, and all of the Klamath Basin, because it's a big, big basin. But there's a lot of big basins in my region, and the California Fish Passage Forum is an extremely great partner for the service. That's like a big, big, big thing. And the partnerships that are being built and maintained by the National Fish Habitat Action Plan, they're really doing great work. I wanted to join this mostly just to hear from folks to see what kind of other work's being done. But I wanted to mostly answer questions that people might have about what the service is doing in Fish Passage for funding. And I can show slides and I can do all that stuff. And I definitely have that. But I was really more interested in just hearing what everybody else has to say. But the service has a lot of different funding opportunities, but in Fish Passage particular, the best place to go is our Fish Passage website. You get everything. It's a one-stop shop. If you literally Google Fish Passage, Fish and Wildlife Service, it will pop that up. And on that webpage, there are great resources of what's available nationally from the National Fish Passage Program. So part of my role in the region is also as the National Fish Passage Program Coordinator for Region 8. That's a big program with a lot of opportunities. We got a lot of injection from the bipartisan infrastructure law. Right now, we're in our third year, NOFO. If you guys have seen that, it's a really good opportunity. There's a lot of opportunities that the National Fish Passage Program in general has always tried and wanted and maintained. But now it's just a really good opportunity for us just to see what all these partnerships, if we had a lot of funding, like what kind of stuff could we accomplish? And there on our website, there is the bipartisan infrastructure section of our website. And we update that with all kinds of cool stories, all kinds of neat stuff that we're doing across the nation. Region 8, so California specifically, has had 3 funded projects through the National Fish Passage Program bipartisan infrastructure law. And that is a extremely competitive process. And I can go into all that process, and it's really complicated. But it has a really great NOFO for explanations on, do I qualify, that kind of thing. One thing we did institute as a program this year that I find to be the most helpful, and then if I had 20 minutes to talk about, which I don't, is the letters of interest that we received through this NOFO process for bipartisan infrastructure law. We got to really see like what's out on the landscape that maybe we're not seeing. And that has been a really good opportunity. And the forum's always been great at that. Like the service is it's a big footprint in restoration in general. And in that footprint, there's a lot of really good people, and there's a lot of good people working on restoration activities. There's specific ones that specialize in fish passage. So if people want to learn about the service and their funding opportunities, that's the best place to start, is just go to your local office. There's a lot of local offices in areas. Ventura office in Southern California, they do a lot of really good fish work. That's where I would really start. Get to know the people that work there, get to know the biologists. There's a lot of people that are working with a lot of people in this webinar. So this is a really awesome opportunity for a lot of people, this webinar. And I don't want to take up any more time just being a talking head or whatever. I want to answer, does anybody have questions for me as the NFHAP coordinator for Region 8, doing fish passage work with the forum? Does anybody have any questions about the services funding opportunity in fish passage, specifically in California? NOFO. Notice the funding opportunity. I like it. Thank you, Garrett.
Jack, I see you've got a question. Go ahead and pop that in the chat and I will relay it.
Awesome. I can read them too, Holly.
Sure.
I could try to answer them, but I'm now just answering questions in the chat.
Sounds good. I think Jack will be putting one in there. I have one for you, Tim, to get us started.
Sounds good.
if I recall, the services funding opportunity is kind of a rolling opportunity. Do you guys accept letters of interest or letters of intent at any point, or do you structure that for a certain time of the year?
It depends on the funding opportunity. Each funding opportunity that the service has, it goes through the NOFO process. So if let's say that we had a new funding opportunity, if somebody reached out to me particularly, I would send them to the national webpage and then let them look at that and then send them to the NOFO. So they can read the NOFO. Oh, this is great. That's kind of how that process rolled. The LOI was even more on top of that. It was part of the structure of our NOFO to see what's out there. And it worked really well. And it's being implemented in a lot of other programs, funding programs in the service.
Thank you, Tim. Yeah,
Yep.
I've heard the same from many different people. The LOI process is very helpful.
Yep.
I just want to remind everyone that for any attendees, you don't have the ability to use your microphone. So any questions you have, please just write them into the chat. Looks like we have a question from Janine. What HUC size were the projects funded by the BIL in California? Is a highly urbanized HUC size 12 competitive?
The HUC size, yeah, we used with Justice 40. That's a really complicated question that I could spend a lot of time on. But yes, we definitely used HUC sizes that were all agreed upon when we were developing the process of funding. And that was like geospatial people were involved there. There's a lot of people that were like, how can we make this happen quickly but be efficient?
Thank you, Tim. Question from Stephen regarding some work they have been doing for some FEMA emergency infrastructure projects that have been difficult to fund. 54 of these projects offer improvement to fish passage. Stephen recommends working with FEMA, making sure they are aware that you guys could work in parallel to fund infrastructure projects while improving habitat as well. Do you have any perspectives, Tim, on working with other major agencies in parallel?
Absolutely. Noah, I'm really glad to see that the agencies are going to present because I think that each one has very good opportunity, not just for funding. And that's kind of what I really wanted to talk about. But yeah, to answer the question, we do work with a lot of different agencies. The service does, but in fish passage and specifically restoration, NOAA is a big partner. The Bureau in California and Nevada is a huge partner. In the Oregon, obviously. So yeah, we do work hand in hand. One big thing is the service with our federal partners has done the Fish Passage Task Force. And that's kind of a nationally led effort. And it's been really helpful to coalesce different funding opportunities through different agencies and where they overlap. And that is a really good place. Again, the website has a lot of this information. I'll post it in the chat, or I know there's some service folks on here. If they could post it in the chat, would be great.
Excellent. Thank you, Tim. Yeah, kind of a follow-up comment from Stephen there would just be that it, working specifically with FEMA might help advance some of these projects, which can be slow to respond. Stephen heard that from other people as well. So I think that's a common issue.
It's a common thing, and FEMA is a huge partner in a lot of places doing fish passage work. And I've worked with a lot of them in different projects, and it's been really smooth. But you do have to know and get involved in the FEMA process. So that one can be a different ballgame. But yes, we do work with FEMA quite a bit. A lot of disaster relief. There's a lot of fish passage work that's going in there, and the service is a part of that even as just a lot of times just the technical expert, because we have capabilities, capacity built in to run these programs. And FEMA is a major player with the service. And we do work with them quite a bit. Yeah.
Yeah. I also want to put in a plug for someone we're going to hear about a little later in the day, Garrett Altman at Epic. I believe Epic helped with a case study regarding kind of making FEMA contingencies and restrictions on restoration work and funding kind of work better for a particular site that's actually in my backyard in the Nooksack River in Washington. And I think that he might be a good one to speak about some specific examples of success working with FEMA. We've got just a few minutes here left for questions before we move on to our next funding opportunity from Bureau of Reclamation. A question from Josh Black at DWR. Any funding opportunities for the current reintroduction work in Shasta Reservoir and the McCloud River for Winter Run Chinook? And Tim, since we're technically still in your segment of the presentation, I'll direct that one to you.
Sounds good. Thanks, Holly. Yeah, the McCloud and the Winter Run program, that's a huge program, and it's getting a lot of funding sources from a lot of places. And specifically the McCloud and some of that reintroduction effort. You know, I am definitely not the expert on that particular project, but the short answer is yes. There's definitely opportunity there. And I think working with the local service offices is the best way to go. If you wanted to go and try to get fish passage program dollars, then yeah, it's Ryan Fogarty is kind of that area. You know, he's the kind of right-hand guy, so to speak, for me in the fish passage program. NIFHAP, really just the partnerships, work with the partnerships, because they meet with the service and a lot of these other people a lot. And they have their finger on the pulse. That's why the partnerships were developed. And so that's really my plug. This is a great partnership. And this is a really good opportunity for people to learn, like, man, we really got to know the forum.
Thank you, Tim.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, I'd say it sounds like a good question that sort of centralizes the where do we go from here question is from Joanna Lassard, who mentions that on some of the information about funding opportunities from the service, it mentions working with your local Fish and Wildlife Conservation Office biologist to be considered for funding. To begin this process, please contact your regional fish passage coordinator. How would you recommend somebody get started if they want to try to get funding from the service, Tim? I believe you are that person, right? The Fish Passage Regional Coordinator for California. Is that you, or are there also other people they can reach out to?
There are definitely people they can reach out to. Ryan Fogarty is the Fish Passage program in general is a really big program. And I am the Region 8 coordinator for the National Fish Passage Program. And Ryan Fogarty covers a lot of different things, including some of the stuff I do with headquarters and national level stuff. So he's really the person to reach out to for Northern California. Southern California, definitely, you know, me. We have Alex Jones is on the call today. Alex Jones is in the regional office. Working on the Culvert AOP program, but he's also very knowledgeable. There's a lot of people that are very knowledgeable for the service that are working in a lot of different programs, but those two names specifically in California are definitely ones that are know the program as well as I do, if not better sometimes, especially in California. But yes, I am the California coordinator for the National Fish Passage Program, but I also cover Nevada and the Klamath Basin.
Thank you, Tim. So to answer Joanna's question, Joanna, I would say just picking up the phone or emailing your local fish and wildlife people working in your region to discuss your project and to start developing your proposal sounds like the correct next step. And Alex Jones just mentioned in the chat, we can, Alex, do you mind just popping your email into the chat if you're comfortable with that? Perfect. So Alex just put in Tim's and his contact information into the chat.
Thanks, Alex. And then Alex, since you're doing that, if you can you just post the national webpage? Thank you.
Perfect. And thank you, Stephen, for your discussion regarding working with FEMA. I think that's a really important conversation, and I think we can continue to discuss that. We'll probably hit on that, not a ton exactly today, but I think you're bringing up some really important points. So I want to acknowledge that I see you. And Alex just put in the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Fish Passage program website. Okay, let's hear from. I don't see those panelists, those emails or links. Jocelyn, I'll direct message you with those. For anybody who's having issues accessing stuff in the chat, we can help get them to you before the end of the webinar, certainly. All right, we're going to hear from our next presenter. That is going to be Catherine from the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation. Catherine, are you on the call?
I am. Thanks, Holly. Can you hear me okay?
I can. All right. And I'm going to have you lead your own presentation today. So I'm going to stop my share and you can just start sharing whenever you are able. Does that work for you?
Great. I'll try to do that. Thanks, Holly.
No problem.
All right. Are you able to see my PowerPoint presentation?
I am.
Awesome. And is it in presenter mode now?
It is.
Great. Thank you so much for inviting me to share a little bit about the WaterSmart program today. So nice to meet you all. And I know I saw some familiar faces in the chat. My name is Catherine Tucker, and I am with the Bureau of Reclamation based out of Denver, Colorado. My office is called the Water Resources and Planning Office, but you might know us better as the office that administers the WaterSmart Grants program. So today I thought we'd do just a general overview of WaterSmart and dive into some of our newer funding opportunities, specifically those that would be great for fish passage projects. And in particular, we want to highlight some of our new funding opportunities for planning and design. So kicking it off, what is WaterSmart? WaterSmart is an umbrella initiative, as we call it, and it's basically just a way that we categorize a number of the Bureau of Reclamation's regional grant programs. So the word WaterSmart comes before a number of opportunities in the title, and WaterSmart covers a very broad variety of projects. So when WaterSmart started, I think back in the early 2000s, it was primarily to fund water and energy efficiency projects. You might be familiar with what we call WEEG, and that funds water conveyance and infrastructure projects. However, more recently, we have received some authorities to start funding larger restoration projects, fish passage projects, as well as collaborative watershed scale planning opportunities. And those are going to be the subset of the WaterSmart grants that I'll be focusing on today. But if there is another WaterSmart funding opportunity that I don't go into detail on, feel free to shoot me a message and I can connect you with the right person in my office to talk about those funding opportunities with. So just some general program information. Most of our WaterSmart grants do come in the form of a grant. However, we do some cooperative agreements, especially when there's a close geographic nexus to a reclamation project, or even if there's a local watershed group that wants to work directly on a reclamation project, such as a dam or a specific irrigation area. Eligible applicants, it varies by funding opportunity, and I won't go into those specifics today, so I highly encourage you, if you're interested in a specific funding opportunity, to look at the eligible applicants section of that funding opportunity. But generally, our eligible applicants are states, tribes, cities and water districts, irrigation districts, watershed groups, and nonprofits. And those are within the 17 Western states. Sometimes Alaska and Hawaii are included, and the insular areas in Puerto Rico are also included in some of our funding opportunities. All of our applications for WaterSmart are solicited through a notice of funding opportunity that typically comes out on an annual basis. And our projects are selected through a competitive selection process. So when you submit a WaterSmart application, it comes to my office. We then assemble a team of reclamation employees from across all of our regions, and they spend about 2 weeks reading, reviewing, and scoring the applications based on how well the project addresses the goals of the funding opportunity and also how well the application addresses the selection criteria. And then those top scoring applications, based upon the funding we have available in a given year, are the ones that are selected for funding. Cost share also varies pretty widely across the WaterSmart Grants program. Typically, with the opportunities that I will talk about today are more restoration-centered funding opportunities. A 25 or 35% non-federal cost share is standard. However, there are a few funding opportunities that have no non-federal cost share required. This is a graphic that we recently developed to help kind of visualize the WaterSmart grants as a collective and show you where the grants fall in terms of a project's development. So we do now have a number of WaterSmart grants for planning, some of which I will go into more detail about, as well as science and tool development. And then, of course, what you might think of traditionally with WaterSmart, which is the implementation of an on-the-ground project. And one thing that I wanted to highlight today before we go into some of the funding opportunities is, as we have started to introduce more planning and design funding, we sometimes see applicants fall into this pitfall where they submit an application for a project when it's not quite at the right stage of development for the opportunity that they are applying for. So maybe we'll see an applicant apply for construction funding when they're really not at a threshold of design to be competitive. So one thing that's important to keep in mind when you're considering a WaterSmart grant is to really ask yourself, where in the development process is my project at the time that I'm applying? If you are looking for funding, you know your watershed has a problem. Maybe there's a water quality issue, a major fish passage issue, but you don't really know the where of what you need to do, and you don't know the what of what you need to do, then we would suggest looking at grants in this conceptual planning bin. So that would be our WaterSmart Planning and Project Design grants, or our WaterSmart Cooperative Watershed Management Program. If you know what you need to do, but you haven't done the design or the engineering and you need funding for that phase of development, then we'd suggest, again, one of those planning and project design grants, the Cooperative Watershed Management Program. Or if the project that you're proposing to do is very large in scale and requires between $500,000 and $2 million to do the engineering, then we would suggest you apply for this Aquatic Ecosystem Restoration Projects Task A. If you are done with the 60% design, you're ready to go into compliance and eventually implement the project, then that would be where you would want to apply for that construction funding. And for restoration, that could come through one of two sources: our environmental water resources projects, or our Aquatic Ecosystem Restoration Projects Task B. So now I will just kind of rapid fire give you a little more information on those funding opportunities I just mentioned. And if you have specific questions, happy to answer them after this slideshow. All right, up first, we've got our Planning and Project Design Grant. This is new. We are actually looking forward to announcing our first round of selections next month. And there are 3 project types within this grant. We have water strategy grants, which can support initial and early stage planning activities, outreach, collaboration, doing on-the-ground field studies, really looking into project scoping and developing a strategy to address whatever problem in your watershed that you are trying to address. We then have project design grants, which is kind of a level ahead in the development of a project. That would be when you know what you need to do, you really just need the funding for design, but this is a smaller funding amount than that Aquatic Ecosystems Task A. So these are for up to $400,000 to support design. We then have drought contingency planning, and this is to develop a comprehensive drought plan that can prepare your watershed for what might be coming. You can develop water forecasting tools and technologies and basically help your area prepare for a worst case drought scenario. The non-federal cost share, a little bit weird here. There are some 0% cost shares under this funding opportunity, specifically for tribes. And if your project will have ecological benefits, which any fish passage project would, then it would be a 25% non-federal cost share required. And you'll note on the bottom here, this funding opportunity is currently open, closes May 21st. And if you do have an application in with us, we will be notifying you of that application status ahead of that deadline, and would love to debrief your application if you are not selected so that you can reapply. Next, we have our Cooperative Watershed Management Program, or QWAMP as we call it. This is one of our older WaterSmart grants, and it's one that's super special because there is no non-federal cost share required whatsoever. And we did just increase the funding amount, so you can receive up to $300,000 for a project lasting 3 years. And this is to support the development of a truly collaborative grassroots watershed group. So if you are just starting out, you want to start a watershed group, you can get funding for stakeholder engagement, outreach, developing a mission and bylaws, salary time. You could bring on a watershed group manager. Or if you're an existing watershed group and you want to do site-specific restoration planning and design, you can also get no cost share required funding for that restoration and design through the Cooperative Watershed Management Program. This opportunity is currently open and it closes in September. We then have our aquatic ecosystem restoration projects. This funding opportunity is a little bit funky because we have a Task A study and design and a Task B construction. So we're really trying to support large-scale, comprehensive aquatic ecosystem restoration projects through their full life cycle with this grant. And when I say large scale, we kind of leave that up to the applicant to define, but these should be projects that are going to have significant impacts on the health of an aquatic ecosystem or benefit fish passage in a significant way. And this critically, and was in the authority specifically that authorized this program, was the removal or bypass of barriers to fish passage, including dams and dam modification. We also prioritize projects that provide regional benefits across multiple basins, or are a component of an aging infrastructure strategy. So for the Task A here, again, it's $500,000 to $2 million, and the construction piece is $3 million to $20 million. Both of these task areas require a 35% non-federal cost share. This funding opportunity is currently closed and will be opening up again in August. And there might be some minor changes. So just know that if you have looked at this opportunity in the past, make sure to look at the funding opportunity closely, again, when it comes out in August. This is just a quick rundown of some of the tasks that you could receive funding for under that Task A, Study and Design. So we have analysis of restoration project design alternatives, stakeholder outreach, site-specific design and engineering, and critically, what we expect of you if you go through a Task A grant is that at the end, you should have a 60% project design and be ready to be competitive for implementation funding. For the construction, you've got finalization of design, outreach to affected stakeholders. We will provide funding to support the environmental and cultural compliance process. And then, of course, the actual on-the-ground activity, the removal or modification of the barrier to fish passage, a huge aquatic habitat project, nature-based solutions, whatever is the solution for your watershed that you've landed upon. We also fund up to 6 months of monitoring post-project implementation, and we will provide funding for all of the equipment, installation, baseline monitoring, etc., because we really want to be measuring the benefits of these projects. We then have the environmental water resources projects, which you can think of this as a kind of younger sibling program to the aquatic ecosystems. And what we mean by that is that the funding caps out where the aquatic ecosystems start. So you can receive up to $3 million for on-the-ground project implementation. Projects under EWRP must have a strong benefit to ecological values. That can be fish passage, in-stream use, habitat, water quality projects, you name it. And under this Task A, you can also do a water conservation and efficiency project, such as improvement of water conveyance infrastructure or storage, so long as there is a formal mechanism, such as an MOU or a water right, dependent on your state, to ensure that the conserved water is being dedicated back to in-stream use. And then the other two task areas, we've got your standard restoration, nature-based solutions projects, ecologically focused water management and infrastructure improvements, such as fish screens, fish passage, modification of infrastructure to optimize co-benefits. Since this funding opportunity is opening up next week, I'll just highlight a little bit more about the applicant eligibility. State entities, tribes, irrigation districts, your state and regional authorities are all eligible as a Category A applicant. If you are a nonprofit conservation organization, we consider you a Category B. You do have to have a letter of partnership from a Category A entity at the time of application. So that can just be, say you're Trout Unlimited, you want to do something with the City of Fresno. City of Fresno just needs to submit a letter, say we support this, we're acting as a partner. That partnership can be as formalized or informalized as it naturally suits the project. And real quick, while I'm coming to the end of my time, I'll cover a few just general application tips. The biggest tip we have is to read the NOFO and then read it again, because there are some subtle differences from year to year. So even if you think that you are really familiar with the funding opportunity, something might have changed. We highly encourage you to schedule a meeting with the program coordinator of the program you're interested in to discuss a project idea ahead of applying, because maybe we could tell you right off the bat, hey, this isn't the right funding opportunity for you. You should actually be applying over here. And, that's a large part of my job and my colleagues' job at the Water Smart team, is to help align you with the right funding opportunity. So we love to talk with you about your projects. Please reach out to us. We also post our past successful applications on our WaterSmart website. So if you are new to the grant writing process, you can take a look at successful applications that have scored well and get some ideas. Then a couple just other tips. Because our reclamation staff that is reviewing and scoring your application comes from all across the Western United States, do not assume that they know anything about your watershed. And instead, really try to paint a picture of your problem, back it up with data, and that will help our reviewers get a sense of the severity of the issue you're trying to solve and why your approach is the correct approach to take. Mind the page limit, because if you submit an application over the page limit, we will unfortunately just have to cut it off right at the limit. And if there's something important, it won't be captured in the application. As much detail as you can provide in the form of maps, site photos, relevant studies, those are really going to help our reviewers. And finally, letters of recommendation are very critical, and they show us that your project has broad, diverse regional support. Just some technical notes here on grants.gov and sam.gov. Make sure that when you're getting ready to submit an application, you go to sam.gov and are registered, and you have your UEI, your unique entity identifier, and that you're also registered in asap.gov. Grants.gov can be finicky. I'm sure that some of my other federal family colleagues on here will agree with that. So start early, and if you're able, submit early. Make sure that if a document is listed as required, both in the NOFO or on grants.gov, you are submitting it. Don't leave anything blank. And if you have any questions, just reach out to us, because we are here to help you and work with you through this application process. All right, last slide. So as Ruth said, we have this historic, unprecedented bipartisan infrastructure law funding. And one thing we do really want to emphasize is that it's through 2026, at least at the Bureau of Reclamation. We're not sure what's going to happen if we have funding left over. So to the extent that you are able to seize this current opportunity and get an application in now before that 2026 funding sunsets, it's going to really help you get that funding in. In particular, we have an enormous amount of funding compared to scale for the Cooperative Watershed Management Program. We highly, highly encourage all watershed groups to put in an application. With there being no non-federal cost share required, we think that that's a prime opportunity for people to get capacity support and design support. And if you've had a QWOMP in the past, you are welcome to reapply. There is no limit to how many of those grants you can receive. And that is everything I have. I will put my email in the chat, and I'm happy to answer any questions that there might be.
Thank you, Catherine. Really appreciate your time, and it's really excellent to see the variety of different funding opportunities you guys have, from capacity to planning and development of organizational capabilities, all the way to construction and monitoring. That's really wonderful to see. We do have a question from James Hoffler about if USBOR has specific criteria for what they would consider a 60% design. I could also recommend other practitioners can chime in with their perspectives on that, as to if a 60% design is a standardized metric, or if there are particular criteria you look for to show that amount of completeness. And then anybody else who does have questions for Catherine as well, feel free to post them in the chat.
That is a great question. And we actually developed an attachment that is with the Aquatic Ecosystems Restoration Program funding opportunity that lists some specific documents that we suggest having in place to claim that 60% design. We intentionally are a little bit loose around that because we understand that, especially with some of these nature-based solutions and restoration projects, they might not go through the standard engineering process. So I can share that attachment, and if you have any more specific questions, you can reach out to us. The only time that we will require design documents is that Aquatic Ecosystem Restoration Project's Task B, and it's also not at the time of application. We'll actually reach back out to you after you've submitted to submit a design package to us.
Thank you, Catherine. Yes, if you have that document, we would love to see that. Question from Janine. Can a watershed group apply for both a fish passage project design grant and a watershed planning grant in the same year?
Yes, absolutely. And we actually have some entities doing that right now. So long as the scope of works for those two grants do not cross over and they are discrete projects and scopes of works in themselves, you are more than welcome to apply for any number of grants with WaterSmart.
Thank you, Catherine. Does anybody else have questions for Catherine about her presentation? Excellent. And I did just want to elevate a kudos, courtesy of Garrett in the chat. Cheers to the Bureau for providing a pass-through funding opportunity for NGOs to apply on the behalf of tribes. I believe, yeah, that referring to the letter of partnership or letter of support process that allows an NGO to work with a tribe or another organization. That's an excellent avenue for building and supporting those partnerships that help get the projects done.
Mm-hmm. And I didn't mention this in my presentation, but we do have specific criteria that gives more points to disadvantaged communities and tribal applications. So highly encourage anyone working in a disadvantaged community or with a tribe to apply.
Excellent. Wonderful to hear. All right, well, we are going to hear next from Tim Chory at California Department of Fish and Wildlife regarding the Fisheries Restoration Grant Program from CDFW. Tim, are you on the call?
Yes.
Wonderful. And I have your presentation. I can run through it if you would like, or you are welcome to share your screen and run through your presentation yourself. What would you prefer?
You can run through it.
Sounds good. Just give me a second to get it up and I'll be ready for you in just a moment.
All right.
Okay, Tim, I'm ready for you anytime.
All right. Great. And thank you, Holly, for having me. Really appreciate it. And thank you for holding a special solicitation kind of meeting a couple weeks back that I couldn't make to, but my boss stepped in for me. So I'm Tim Chory. I'm the Fisheries Restoration Grant Program statewide coordinator for California, a program within the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. And today I was going to go over our proposal solicitation notice, a PSN, for this year. It's currently open, and I'll get to that through the presentation. Next slide. So today I was going to do a really high-level overview of the program to cover in 10 minutes. I did a presentation yesterday. Hopefully people were able to attend on that solicitation that ran about an hour. But The agenda today is just a quick introduction of what FRGP is. Then I'll go over the timeline for the program and solicitation, explain a little bit of how we get our funding and the priorities for our funding, then the eligible project types that I think would be applicable for this group, and then a overview of how to apply on our web, and then open it up for any questions and answers. Next slide. So yeah, FRGP provides funding to restore anadromous salmonid habitat with the goal of ensuring survival and protection of California species. We do this by funding ecological restoration projects that fund and tasks that are in state and federal recovery plans. Ideally, projects that target limiting factors to salmon and steelhead survival. Next slide. So the funding portion for for this program is we have about $18 million available annually. And I'll talk a little bit where that money comes from. There's no minimum or maximum application sizes for us. Typically, though, we see around 2 million is the upper limit of the projects that we receive. Projects that are applying to us this year should plan to start March or thereafter on 2025, and they must end in March of 2029. So for about 4 years, the funding is available. It's not on this slide, but match isn't required. But if you look in our guidelines, we explain how match gets factored into scoring. So it's encouraged, but not required. Next slide. So the timeline, we released our PSN back in January, and applicants had an opportunity to apply for concept proposals in March, by March, right before we opened our full solicitation. We're currently in the full solicitation period right now. So we're receiving applications and proposals, and those will be due April 18th, so in about 2 weeks at 3 p.m. After that, we do a technical review from April to June. Not here on the timeline, but between June and December, when we're doing awards, is when we get permits for our projects that we fund. I'll touch on that a little bit later, but and then we award projects in December of 2024 and typically execute agreements in early spring, February, March of 2025. Next slide. So we get our funding from NOAA, from PCSRF, which is the Pacific Coastal Salmonid Recovery Fund. It's a competitive grant that NOAA provides for the Northwest tribes and states. And in giving out that money, they have 3 different priorities. The priority 1 is our implementation projects or design projects that lead to 100% design. That's about $12 million, give or take, annually, depending on how much we are awarded. Priority 2 is the watershed scale planning and effectiveness monitoring. And so watershed scale is a general term that CDFW uses to evaluate projects. And it doesn't have to be from the confluence to the headwaters. It can be just large scale planning, large scale effectiveness monitoring. So meaning, a large portion of an entire watershed. CDFW uses a portion of that priority 2 funding to carry out our California monitoring program, which looks at population and life cycle monitoring of salmonids. So that's why when you add up the amounts, you don't get around 18 million. We take about 3.5 million for that California monitoring program. And then the priority 3, which is 10% of those funds, is for the planning projects that don't get to 100% design, and the outreach and education and training projects, as well as project scale effectiveness monitoring. Next slide. So the eligible project types that we fund, these are all project types that we use to help segment the projects to better understand them and require specific information for them to help us permit them and review them. But overarching, it's basically all your typical in-stream restoration and upslope restoration, and then community outreach project types. The first, I tried to sort them in what was most applicable to fish passage. So obviously you have your first two are the PDs, are project designs, either 100% or just a feasibility study. So that's, we say that anything less than 100% is kind of your feasibility, but around 65% feasibility. Your PL projects, which would be your larger scale kind of assessments of a watershed to see where you may want to do a project if you didn't have a specific location in mind. And then the in-stream work of the actual fish passage at stream crossings. So a fish passage at stream crossings project is something that is an existing crossing that's a barrier, and you want to replace it with a new project or new crossing that would not be a barrier. The HB project types are for your either dams or weirs or any other barrier that was in the stream that you just want to remove to allow for fish passage. The HI is really the broadest probably project type, which includes in-stream habitat restoration. So that's your large wood, creating pools, meandering, creating or changing this kind of the meander of the stream, increasing floodplain connection, or creating off-channel habitat or wetlands is HI projects. And obviously riparian is creating riparian work, and I won't go through the rest of them, but those are kind of the big ones that I think this group would be interested in. Next slide. I think this may be my last, if not close to the last, but one thing that's really unique about FRGP is that for applicants that follow the California Department of Fish and Wildlife's restoration manual or other, we have 9 other approved manuals. Mostly they're Oregon or Washington's restoration manuals, or the low-tech process-based manuals, or some beaver manuals. Your slide switched to the.
Oh, sorry. I was trying to, I actually had the other document from our last FRGP presentation, and I was going to put it in the chat real quick, but I forgot I was sharing my screen. Okay. Sorry, Tim, continue.
That's okay. Those lists, they're in our guidelines if you want them, and I think on our website in our references page. Pretty use those documents, and so if folks are following those best management practices, kind of our approved practices, then we're able to include your project into a CEQA M&D that the department writes, and then subsequently a 401 that we write, and then we notify Army Corps with our standing programmatic 404 permit, RGP 12, 78, and 16. And then if you're applicable, if you're in the coastal zone, we work to get a CDP for you. So the way that works essentially is you apply to us in the spring. If you score well enough to be funded, we then take your project through CEQA. And then once CEQA is complete and you're awarded, you basically then, and by the time you get executed, you'd have a 401, 404 CEQA coverage ready to go for construction. So FRGP is a little unique where if you're applying for construction, you need to have 100% construction plans ready, but you don't need to have all your permits in hand. Because for the most part, we provide them if you're following our practices. So it's a huge cost savings and time savings for applicants. Next slide. Oh, that is the last one. The FRGP takes all of our applications online through a program called Web Grants. And so applicants will need to register or just log on to this program. If you click the register there button, it'll be a quick registration. Know that it's a human person who reviews your application and approves it. So if you apply, end of the day today, that's not going to get approved until Monday. And so if you're interested in applying, do that sooner than later. We do have a pretty detailed application process. So if you're interested in applying, I'd start as soon as possible. On our webpage, there are online instructions on how to apply. There's also a template, a rich text format template on our website that you can use to fill out so that you're not working it's a little bit clunky to work within the program when you're drafting stuff. So the rich text template allows you to work within Word or whatever document program you want to use, and then just copy and paste it when it's time to put in the application. And if you have any issues with that, you can contact CDFW Web Grants at wildlife.ca. Next slide. And that's kind of the high overview with my 10-minute mark that I could get in.
Thank you, Tim. Really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thanks again for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. First question, we've got a few questions coming in from the chat. First one from David is, does the 404 permit also cover ESA consultation with NMFS or U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service?
Yes.
Good. All right.
And I'll also add, if you're working with us, we can typically provide handling of those species if the department's involved with fish relocation, which also saves some other permitting needs if you're trying to handle and relocate endangered species.
Thank you, Tim. That's good to know. Next question from Jocelyn. If designs are at 100%, wouldn't applicants already have been in consultation with agencies to make sure they're in compliance with CEQA?
That'd be nice if they did, but no, not always. We get plans from projects that haven't been in consultation with the agencies. Sometimes it's projects that they know that they're going to take the FRGP path, so they know what the expectations are for what we need in the application and you can look at past M&Ds to see what permit conditions we require, but I don't think there's anything special about what we do. It's kind of just a standard restoration best practices. At least as far as I've been doing restoration.
Thanks, Tim. Question from Paul. Any sense of what your funding might be for the next cycle?
Yeah, I think it is. So obviously we apply to NOAA annually, but we're also the same thing Ruth was talking about. We get, luckily the PCSRF funds got bolstered with infrastructure money. And so where we typically get about $14 million a year, we're seeing about $16 to $18 million. And so I think that's what we're hopeful for this year is around, I'll say $17 million. So that's our hope. That's what we're planning on. We won't know until July.
Thank you, Tim. Question from Adrienne. Does each person named as a contact have to have a separate login? I presume they mean for the Web Grants login.
That's really up to the applicant. It can be, you can share a password and a login and do it that way, or yeah, each individual can have a separate login and you're able to link people to an application. So you can have one application and 3 people working on that application with 3 different logins at the same time.
Good to know. Are there any other questions from Tim or for Tim before we move on to our last funding opportunity presentation? Ken, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. It's great hearing about what FRGP is doing for projects in the state. That's great.
Thanks, Holly. And I will, Jocelyn Curtis, early and often piece. I will say that the designs that FRGP funds, we typically require a technical advisory committee as part of that design. And those typically include CDFW staff and other agency staff in those TACs. So it's not so much that we're reaching out to them, it's that they're part of the design. So like someone from Restoration Center or CDFW who's familiar with all the agency permitting is going to be on that committee. So can raise those red flags from the start. Like,
Good to know. Thank you.
you're welcome.
Okay, stop share. All right, next we're going to hear from Josh at Department of Water Resources. Josh, are you on the call?
I am. I'm here.
Perfect. I have your presentation in case you would like me to manage it. If you would like, you're welcome to start sharing your screen by just clicking that share screen green button kind of at the bottom of your Zoom control panel.
Sure. Yeah, I'll prefer to show my presentation from my computer. So
Go for it.
all right.
And just right before Josh gets going, I'll mention we are running about 10 minutes behind. That's because we've had excellent engagement with question and answers, and I think that's really important. I will still give a full 30 minutes for a lunch break, and we'll continue our afternoon session after that. So just so you guys know, I am aware of that, and we'll just keep on trucking. Thank you, Josh. We can see your screen. Josh, just so you know, you're on mute, so make sure to unmute yourself.
Is that better?
That is better. We can hear you. Go for
Okay.
it.
Okay. And you can clearly see my screen
Correct.
for my presentation. Okay, great. All right, let's try this again. So yeah, thank you for having me. It's really great to see all these opportunities throughout the state, both from the federal and state standpoint. And yeah, thanks to Holly and the forum for having me. So yeah, I'm Josh Black, the program lead and senior environmental scientist for Department of Water Resources. And today I'm going to give you a little bit of information about our riverine stewardship grant program. There we go. Okay, so briefly for our agenda today, I'm going to go over the history and a brief overview of the riverine stewardship grant program, talk about program priorities, eligible project costs, talk about our grant portal application submittal process, review criteria, administration of the grant, and take any questions if there's time. So just the history of our grant program. So my program in general at DWR has had several grant opportunities over the years, and this is one of the newer grant programs that we have available. And so this was established in 2022 by the California Water Code, Section 7049. It's also the funding comes from Proposition 13, also known as the Cost of the Water Act funds. And the main focus of the grant program is to implement watershed-based riverine and riparian stewardship improvements by providing technical and financial assistance in support of projects that would reduce things like flood risk, improve water quality, achieve climate change benefits, and importantly, the restoration and enhancement of fish populations, habitat, and improvement on fish passage. So the scope of our the riverine stewardship grant program is any project that is occurring in the Delta Export Service Area for the State Water Project and Central Valley Project is eligible, as well as any project. This could be both things could be the case, or it could be one of these two things is the case for eligibility. So if your project area is within the Association of Bay Area Governments counties, that also qualifies. So our current funding amount is $12 million. I want to say that we've had a few applications since it started, and we've awarded 2 projects so far, but we're really clamoring to have more applications. So we would love to have a lot more people interested and a lot more people applying. So just letting you know, we have $12 million and we're chomping at the bit to have this to fund some good projects. And there's no maximum as far as any single project goes, as long as it's within the $12 million. And it's a single applicant eligibility. So, and you would have to be a local public agency or a nonprofit. And all these guidelines are in the website, and the guidelines that are in the webinar, I guess, agenda, and I can provide that as well if needed. And the last thing is that the projects need to support the California Water Code section 79205.6 water quality and supply portion of that. And another thing is, the applications, they are projects that are awarded money are first come, first serve. And our funds are going to be available for at least fiscal year 2025 coming up here, and possibly longer depending on what decisions are made. So there's plenty of opportunity. And next, I'll go over our priorities for the River Range Stewardship Program. So we support fish passage improvements, others similar projects to accomplish increased ecological, tree management, climate change, and community improvement benefits and fish population benefits, mainly catered to native fish, and more so if there's special status anadromous fish or salmonids benefited, that's even better. So our goals are to protect and restore and enhance the natural environment of riparian systems, and supporting innovations in green infrastructure to support fish migration improvements, habitat enhancement by reconnecting habitat, aquatic habitat, to help fish and wildlife endure drought and adapt to climate change. So I'll go over just some examples of eligible project types under the program. So eligible projects are projects that, or examples are projects that have innovative green infrastructure, enhancing water quality for fish and wildlife, fish-friendly intakes or fish screens for ag diversions or any other sort of diversions, fish passage and migration improvements or complete barrier removal, habitat improvements and water quality improvements to benefit aquatic species and native fish. Also, things like floodplain creation and restoration and connection or reconnection to things like off-channel and wetland habitats are eligible, as well as gravel injection projects. Examples of projects not eligible are projects that are a planning only project. So we want to have the project needs to be more than planning. It has to go through implementation and construction. So unfortunately, that's not available. Also, things like lake and reservoir enhancements, mitigation only projects, long-term maintenance only projects, post-construction, fish and aquatic habitat monitoring only projects, and unfortunately, the program does not fund endowments. And briefly, I'll go over the eligible and ineligible cost. And for a more detailed list, again, you can look at the guidelines that have been provided, or just contact me or any resources that are provided in the presentation. So all payments for the River and Stewardship Program need to be made in arrears, meaning the work must be completed first and then invoiced to the program. And supporting documents that are required need to be provided with these invoices, and then DWR will reimburse the grantee for eligible costs. Costs that are eligible for reimbursement are things like planning, engineering, implementation, construction, environmental permitting and compliance. Ineligible costs are things like grant application preparation expenses, indirect costs that are not attributable to the project, as well as costs incurred that are outside of the grant agreement. And next, I'll go over the grants portal concept submittal. Just touch on that process. So interested applicants will first submit a grant or submit a project concept into the grants portal and make sure it's under the River and Stewardship Program and not under any other grant program that DWR provides. Also, the concept proposal is first, and then if you're invited after that, then you would submit a full application to the program. Concept proposal consists of 8 questions that are listed in the guidelines. Each proposal will be evaluated for the alignment to the program's priorities. And once again, if selected, you will be notified and you will be able to submit a full application for consideration. These concept reviews, concept applications, and full applications are evaluated on a monthly rolling basis. There's no really set time period like in some of these other opportunities today that have been mentioned. It's a rolling basis, so it's you can apply essentially at any point in time. And the applications are open at the beginning of each month, and we close them at the last day of each month. And then all applications submitted within the month are evaluated shortly after that. And generally, it takes about for the whole process, it takes about 6 months to award the grant money and execute a grant if all the application materials are provided. And I'll go over the review criteria for the program. So you look at the project purpose and strategic fit, organizational capacity of the prospective applicant, and sustainability of the project, the readiness of the project. So the more shovel ready a project is, it's even better. Also, any sort of other benefits that, or we'll consider all of the benefits that the project could possibly provide in alignment with the program, and also ensure that the improvements or any of the project proposed will benefit water quality and water supply that aligns with the California Water Code section that funds this agreement or funds this program. So each application is then scored 3 times. We take the average of scores within 10 points of each other. The information is then presented to a management review team, where that management review team will consult with partner agencies if necessary, and a draft award list will be created soon after that. The list will be available publicly, and we'll notify you if you are part of that draft award list. And there will be a short public comment period, and after that, we will go on to the next phase. So next, going briefly into the administration of the grant program. So you would then enter into a contract with DWR. Grantees must then provide a scope of work, a deliverables list, the budget schedule for the project that is satisfactory to DWR, and the agreement must be executed within 6 months of the date the grant is awarded, or else it can be withdrawn. Some of the standard contract deliverables that are required during the administration of the grant, once it's executed, are environmental compliance documents like CEQA and NEPA, any other federal or state, local required cultural or environmental resource permits. A very notable deliverable, which for other programs have had issues in the past, is that a deed restriction and or a conservation easement is required for the project and the project area, so that the state's investment into the project is protected in perpetuity. So this would be a deed restriction in perpetuity for protection of the land that is awarded the grant money. Also, depending on the type of project it is, engineering plans, up to 360, 90%, those will be reviewed by DWR, and they must be stamped by a certified engineer. And then for invoicing, quarterly progress reports are required, as well as quarterly invoices are typically what is required for the program. And completed projects must have a monitoring plan in place, although the funds for this program can be used to develop that plan, but cannot be used for funding long-term monitoring or post-construction. But it can be, these can be used for monitoring that is conducted during the construction of the project. We call it project completion monitoring. Lastly, there's a 5-year limit on contracts, meaning that the project must be completed within a 3 to 5 year timeframe. Yeah, and any questions do you have about the grants portal process, feel free to contact the information here, the email and phone number. Any questions that you have about the concept application, please feel free to email our general email, the RSP at wire.ca.gov, or me at dr.black@wire.ca.gov. And most questions can be answered by looking at the guidelines, which is available on our website, as well as should be available on the internet. And yeah, any questions?
Josh, we've got a question from the chat from Garrett. Is there a cost share requirement for the Riverine Stewardship Program?
There is not a cost share requirement for this program. So single applicant is fine. You can have a cost share. That's not a problem, but typically we've seen single applicants without cost share, so there's no requirement.
Thank you. Any other questions for Josh about the DWR funding program? Josh, I've got one for you. Are there any projects supported by the program that you would like to highlight?
Sure, it's a very young program. So far we've funded 2 projects, one in city of Oakdale, Stanley Wakefield, wilderness area restoration. So some side channels were reconnected to the main stem river there, as well as wetlands are also connected. And so far, even within a few months, it's attracting a lot of aquatic species that weren't there in the past. So that was a really good project so far that we're still working with the grantee on that one. There's also the second one is the Lagunitas Creek gravel injection project, and we're at the beginning stages of that, but we're really excited about it because it's going to provide a lot of potential spawning habitat and rearing habitat for steelhead and salmonids in that whole region, Lagunitas Creek, below the dam. So those are the two ones we have so far, but like I mentioned, we would love to see a lot more applications, and yeah, we're hoping to award some more money.
Thank you, Josh.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I fear you may be a victim of the pre-lunch clam up, but that's okay. Thank you for putting your contact information so people can contact you about the program. Anybody with questions for Josh about the program, certainly feel free to reach out to myself or Josh, and we can help get you in contact. Okay, like I said, we are running just about 10 minutes behind from our original agenda, which is pretty good considering we have a 4-hour webinar. So thank you to all of our morning panelists for providing those high-level overviews and keeping us moving. And thank you to everybody who put questions in for our panelists. It's really wonderful to see engagement and interest in our funding opportunities.
So good afternoon, everybody. Thank you. I'm Garrett Altman with the Environmental Policy Innovation Center. And let me get to my full screen here. It's not letting me do it with the command. I'm based in Santa Fe, New Mexico, but I'm a California native and have great interest and passion for supporting fish passage projects in there. Today, I'm going to talk about some of the resources my organization could provide, and I'll also cap on a couple funding opportunities that weren't included this morning. So at EPIC, our mission is to increase the pace and scale of environmental restoration and progress. My program is really focused on supporting widespread implementation of fish passage and supporting habitat connectivity through aquatic organism passage. The program focus right now, or historically initially with my program, was on culvert and weir replacement to support anadromous fish in the Western US. This included primarily our anadromous fish states, California, Oregon, Washington, and Idaho. But we've also been able to expand the program to support communities and tribes working on fish passage projects in interior states as well. We do this by coordinating with federal, state, tribal, and non-governmental and private partners to leverage assistance and resources that are available where we can collectively advance these projects. The focus, though, of who we're really trying, or priority of who we're trying to assist are tribes and environmental justice communities, or EJCs. We really want to leverage the existing federal funding and state funding that's available right now to reach those communities that historically haven't been able to access that funding, whether it be due to capacity limitations, funding shortfalls, whatever it may be. We're really here to help navigate those shortcomings and leverage the resources that are out there to make sure we can advance some of these great projects that we've discussed within this forum. The way we do this is direct engagement with the communities seeking assistance. If folks are out there listening today and are interested in leveraging some support, please feel free to reach out to me, and we can get the dialogue going to develop those projects, or understanding the projects you have, what limitations are there, and where we can strategize to overcome those. Providing technical assistance is a large part of what I do. As I mentioned, project identification. I can provide pro bono application assistance for federal funding. Initially, we focused on that culvert AOP program, but we can do that for any of the federal funds that are out there. And other things we like to do are really advance best practices and leverage experiences from other practitioners, not just in the region, but in the Western US, or even internationally in some cases. And another part of what we do is communication and storytelling when we have successes out in the field or limitations, and really advancing those stories to the appropriate audiences. Coordinating resources is the other big part of what I do. Understanding who can do what and where capacity limitations can be overcome. For instance, Trout Unlimited has funding nationally right now to provide project managers on big fish passage projects. So understanding where those resources are, where they can be where they can be applied is a critical part of what we do. And then the last part of what I do and work with internally with my team is we really advocate for policy, program, and permitting reform, finding opportunities where permit streamlining can take place, where programs can evolve and build off of the successes and better reach the audiences and meet the objectives they're striving to achieve, excuse me. Some of those best practices includes collaborating, leveraging support and expertise. Collaboration is key to so many of these projects, especially landscape level projects. Really prioritizing, as one of the programs earlier said, those letters of support can be worth their weight in gold, and having that broad support across both the funding and political and implementation landscapes are really critical to successful projects. Other best practices are more natural based or nature based solutions, making sure that we're promoting those ecosystem services and providing natural bottom passage where possible, and making sure we have that floodplain connectivity, and then also highlighting co-benefits such as public access or cultural resources that might be enhanced for tribal entities. We like to incorporate restoration projects with infrastructure. I've learned that working with FEMA, that if you're going to have a roadway projects, that there's a tremendous opportunity to incorporate quite extensive restoration above and below those creek crossings. And the cost is somewhat negligible often to the infrastructure itself. So great opportunities to incorporate restoration in these projects. And then again, I have here terrestrial wildlife considerations. A lot of crossings are built with the focus of just wildlife or just fish. A lot of these crossings can actually incorporate both. So having those considerations and connecting with the resources and research out there that can complement those projects. I work with a lot of tribes, and understanding that indigenous or traditional knowledge and how that overlaps often with nature-based solutions presents great opportunities for best practices incorporation, utilizing local natural materials, limiting foreign materials such as concrete. Great things to incorporate in your projects. And then lastly, community engagement, just to increase that public support and eventually that sense of ownership and pride in a project that can lead to the long-term sustainability and even the monitoring in some cases. Some of the improvements we have or we're currently working on right now, specifically with the nationwide 27 for restoration projects along stream waters of the U.S., regulated streams by the Corps of Engineers. We're really working to advance or to limit the requirements associated with that project for voluntary restoration. One of those examples is pre-jurisdictional determinations, excuse me. And a lot of that groundwork that the Corps requires for larger infrastructure projects, where can we eliminate those requirements for voluntary restoration? And then also occurrences where you're having a habitat conversion, say a floodplain to a saturated wetland. If there's ecological uplift occurring, how can we make sure that doesn't inhibit the permitting process, but actually enhances or encourages it? Working with FEMA, as Holly mentioned earlier, the no-rise rule is a big issue nationally, and especially when it comes to integrating woody degree or grade control structures in restoration projects. We're really working with FEMA now to create an exemption that integrates an exemption for the integration of those materials through nature-based solutions. And we're optimistic that we'll see some headway in that by the end of the year. And then also working with agencies and developing their programs just to make them more efficient and effective. A few examples of projects, funding sources that weren't covered earlier, but this National Culvert Replacement and Restoration, the Culvert AOP program, as we refer to it. This grant program is competitive, it's national, but there's a lot of money there. $1 billion was allocated to DOT to administer this program. Fortunately, they're really relying heavily on interagency resources behind the scenes in their applicant review and selection criteria. And we're seeing that to have tremendous results on the ground with like really nice assortment of both geographic, economic, and different sizes of government, including tribes for awardees in the first year. Another couple opportunities through the U.S. Forest Service and the Department of Interior, the America the Beautiful Challenge. This was the first national goal to conserve 30% of the U.S. lands by 2030. It's focused on, conserving and reconnecting those waters and wildlife to those habitats. Lots of money. Originally, was $35 million allocated this program. Went up to $141 million last year. So great opportunities, especially for landscape level projects. And within that expanding aquatic habitat connectivity and conservation of at-risk species, large collaborative projects are all key and relate to fish passage efforts in California. And then lastly, the cost share for tribes is minimal on that, and Native Americans and philanthropy is actually covering the entire match that is required with the program. Another for folks interested in headwater streams that may or may not be associated directly with their project, but the U.S. Forest Service is really trying to advance culvert upgrades within their lands and on their road networks. They have a tremendous amount of culverts, 65,000 approximately nationally, and over half of those are inaccessible for aquatic organisms. So with that, you can contact me, we can work with the region and really advance some of that network connectivity that your projects might be providing on lower reaches of some of these larger rivers, and extend those up into so we can ensure those fish are getting to those reproductive and foraging grounds. They do have another cooperative aquatic landscape restoration program, another big funding, not quite as large as some of the others, but still significant, and the Forest Service is very motivated to tackle some of these. This has a little more wider applicability than just transportation networks, with dams, irrigation weirs, and similar structures included. In conclusion, just to reiterate this once in a generation opportunity we have right now, and we heard this morning, there is a lot of funding out there right now. We want to make sure this funding is getting distributed. If there's funding left over, we're trying to create mechanisms with the agencies that can be leveraged potentially by other agencies or other programs, so there is no leftover money. And then also, where can we create like long-lasting, durable change and creating fish passage opportunities beyond the federal bill and IIJA cycles? So we're really motivated and happy to work on such efforts and looking to coordinate with new partners. So if folks have specific projects or are interested in developing or identifying new reaches and could use some technical support, please feel free to reach out to me. And I'll end with a quote from a tribal member here in New Mexico: "If it's good for the planet, it's ultimately good for us." And that's why we all do this. And I thank you all for your efforts. Thanks, Holly.
Thank you, Garrett. Really appreciate you coming on here. Thank you for all the work that you do. EPIC is an excellent program. It's really wonderful to see the breadth of what you guys are able to accomplish. And I do encourage anybody whose project is in those initial stages where you just really need a little bit of help and support to get moving. Garrett and EPIC are an excellent resource for you. So let's keep it moving. We're going to hear next from Sandy Jacobson, the director of the South Coast region for CalTrout and the chair of the California Fish Passage Forum. And Sandy's talk is going to align really well with what Garrett was just talking about this funding on the ground. Sandy's going to talk to us about putting together cost share strategies for helping leverage funds to support your projects. Thank you for being here, Sandy, and take it away whenever you are ready.
Good. Thank you, Holly. And thank you, Garrett. That was a perfect transition into some of the things I'm going to talk about. So what we've heard this morning, just from Garrett, is how to put together packages and just the funding, the sheer funding that's available to put together state, federal, foundational funding to support projects that are maybe larger than some organizations have taken on before. I know that's the case for CalTrout as well. And so as we're taking on some of these fish passage projects, we're really digging into the details of how to set up these cost shares, what the strategies are, risk mitigation, et cetera. So I'm just going to hit some of the highlights here as we go through.
Sandy, just so you know, in case you do want to go into a presenter mode, currently you're not in a presenter mode yet.
Okay, that's good.
So let me slow you down though. If you want to just keep going without it, that's okay.
Fine.
Perfect.
Here we go. So some of the cost share considerations that we have gone through are looking at and developing projects that have multiple funders. So this can come from several sources at different times. So the timing is really important on putting these packages together. We also understand that agencies typically fund along priority areas, and that it's very helpful to clearly identify within a grant proposal going in and to cluster these line items for particular tasks for clarity within that budget of what that funder is paying for and what the deliverables are. In terms of the budget, this may align the match by task, by contract, and by funder. I'll show you that in just a moment. And then I also take into consideration within that budget, just mindful of what the funding opportunities are, what their expiration timelines are. And a lot of people ask about what's the difference between match and cost share. And I've just laid out a couple of key things here that Gaby from CalTrout, she's our Director of Institutional Giving, some of the points that she makes in thinking about this. For match funding, some funders have one-to-one, some have no match requirement. It's typically tracked along with expenses, and it can be cash or in kind. It's not fungible or transferable, and it must be used within the same time frame as the grant, and it's only used once. Cost share is a little bit different situation. It's a little bit more loose definition and usage, although typically it applies to a quantified body of work. It can be either in kind or cash. It's designed to benefit the project in multiple ways. And also in the context of thinking about match, cost share, and the sequence of events and cash flow is to consider the retention in the budgeting and also the difference in cash flow and being reimbursed typically by state grant and agreements. And federal is typically more of a drawdown where you can recover the cash pretty close to the timing that you incurred the expense. And that sometimes makes a really big difference on some of the large $1 million invoices that might be coming through for construction. So what we are trying to do, what the challenge is to coordinate funding sources, align the budget structure, and then elevate the risk matrix to the point where you're really comfortable that you considered most of the things that could happen and developed mitigation strategies. And what the opportunity is really, it's generational. So these are nature-based solutions. They're on anywhere from a small to a large scale. They can have landscape impact of opening up entire rivers, wildlife corridors, and improving aging infrastructure. And it really provides us an opportunity to be leaders in California and really take care of our environmental context and the species and the wildlife. And they're worth it. This is I'm in San Diego and in the southern DPS. The steelhead are few in number, but they're mighty. And they do come in after rains when the sandberms breach. And so even though some of these projects are complicated, they're a lot of partnerships and interdisciplinary teams, it's just so worth it. And so from CalTrout, we tend to think of our projects and the associated funding in terms of science. We want to really have the best science available. Sometimes they involve legal and policy where we build partnerships and resolve conflict. A lot of times we're working with multiple agencies or entities that have different sorts of missions regarding public like life and property. And then we're trying to figure out exactly how to work the fish passage into that so everyone benefits. Restoration will usually start with engineering. And there's typically some element of innovation in here where you're doing kind of problem solving on the fly, trying to address constraints and move things forward into construction. And then the community is always just the integral part of this, collaborating, learning, leadership, all of this pulled together to make a project work. So just for example, I just want to give you a couple of examples. So for CalTrout, some of our projects statewide, they range over 7 regions. We have well over 75 projects. This is a little bit of an older slide. Many partners, and most of these projects, due to their size, do have multiple funders. And so they can range anywhere from removing obsolete dams, working in estuaries, working in the Central Valley and the floodplains. These are very large projects. Down here in the South Coast, doing endangered steelhead recovery, the Sierra Nevada meadows. These are tremendous. These are our source waters. They're really important. And Northern California, the source water up there and their aquifers, the Klamath Basin, salmon streams in the Bay Area, and then also the policy and advocacy. So I want to just give you an example of one that I'm working on in San Diego County. So this is Santa Margarita River. This is a total fish passage barrier that's funded for construction from multiple funders, both state and federal, and some are on today. And then this is a new steel bridge that will be constructed to provide passage from the coast all the way to the headwaters. And so putting this package together, there are I just mentioned there are multiple funders. And so as you go through this slide, focus on the lower, the blue is design. The green on the upper is getting into construction. The timeline is in the middle. So you're moving from a design to a construction phase. Typically starts with your partner team meetings, going through preliminary design from 30 to 65% to 90. Submitting these to agencies and to county and other entities that need to review and back and forth on that. And then and that usually takes at least 3 years getting into the permits and then heading into construction. So on the top in the green, about 2 years ahead of time is putting in these grant proposals, really thinking carefully about what you need, when you need it, and what funders are likely to fund, and then putting together that package into a funding cohort. A really important part of this project and process is risk identification, analysis, and especially mitigation. So these can either be funding risks, organizational risks, or operational risk, and that would include going into construction as well and field work. So I've just, I have pages of these, and I've just hit the highlights here, right in for funding, since we're talking about that. So I always consider funding shortfall. What are the mitigations for that? And I really like doing these sorts of heat maps. So you have the likelihood of occurrence is either low green, medium yellow, or high blue, or high red, I mean. And then the impact to the project, like if it has high impact, then that's red. So if you raise 80% and the 20% does not come through and you can't start your project, everything else is going, that's a high impact, and it may be a medium to high likelihood of occurrence. It just depends on the project and the timeline. And then you plan for delays, and then also the process of legal and grants review early in the process. Then coming back to the funding sources themselves, I think Holly went through this earlier as far as the Fish Passage Portal, what we've heard today, there are many opportunities. It's really thinking carefully about what is the best match, either for the type of barrier that's to be removed, the sequence of events, and where it is within the state as well, and what the funder priorities are. And that's just an example of how one would set up a multiple funder cost share. You just have the different clusters of project management, construction, either technical support, permitting support, the tribal, biological, cultural, and archaeological monitoring, construction tasks, contingency, and then going through restoration, outreach, and then pre and post monitoring. So each one of those, there might be up to like 50 line items that by various funders, trying to cluster the tasks, have it make sense when you go to invoicing so that it rolls out well. So then the finish. So getting the construction crews in, getting the bridge or whatever project it is, the culvert remediated, and then doing the pre and post project monitoring. So this, I'm going to switch gears. So this is a recent arrival into the Southern California Steelhead DPS. This is just from March 22nd from Kachuma. The COMB staff, Mark Capelli, just sent this over. It's a beautiful adult steelhead that came into Salsapuedes Creek, which is a tributary to the Santa Ynez River. And so I just want to spend a couple of moments just showing you not only the DPS, which you see here for Southern Steelhead, but also we're right on the cusp of learning more about the fate of the Southern California Steelhead state petition to list it as endangered. So there's a Fish and Game Commission meeting coming up on the 17th and 18th. So this shows kind of part of the issue as far as fish passage. What you're seeing here is from Santa Barbara, basically kind of up into almost into it's the Santa Maria River, going all the way down to the border with Mexico. That it shows these are the key rivers. Yellow is critical habitat as defined in the NMFS recovery plan. And then the red is all the excluded habitat. This is in the mountains. This is where that habitat is that they used to go to. And so just the timeline of the petition was CalTrout led this back in 2021. And then it took a couple of years to get deemed sufficient information by CDFW at a Fish and Game Commission meeting. Went into 2022, where it listed as a candidate species, and it went for the year status review at CDFW. They released their report and stated that they believe that the petition is warranted for listing the Southern Steelhead and Rainbow Trout as endangered, and the meeting is on the 18th. And above all, the community engagement. So during these projects, especially the large ones, working with tribal partners, working with the community to help them understand different parts of their watershed and how things are connected is absolutely great. So the goal is diversity, inclusion, access to nature, particularly important in Southern California.
Thank you so much, Sandy. It's really great to get into the nitty-gritty of putting together budgets and cost shares, since that ultimately is going to be a really important part of moving these projects forward. We've got a little bit of time for questions. Does anybody have questions for Sandy? Okay, thank you very much, Sandy. That was really excellent to hear.
Sure.
Next, we're going to be hearing from Stephanie Falzone of Sustainable Conservation about their work helping create access to simplified permitting options. Stephanie, thank you so much for being here, and take it away whenever you are ready.
All righty, thank you so much. And Sandy and I did not coordinate on this, but my first slide happens to be of a fish passage project in Santa Barbara County.
There you go, Stephanie.
It's all connected.
It is all connected. So hi, I'm a senior project manager on the Accelerating Restoration team at Sustainable Conservation. And for those of you who don't know us, we're a California-based environmental nonprofit that advances the collaborative stewardship of California's land, air, and water for the benefit of nature and people. Many of you have probably heard there's been a lot of momentum around improving our regulatory systems and helping save time and money, get more of that restoration funding towards projects on the ground. And Sustainable Conservation and others have been working in partnership with the agencies to put restoration on a separate regulatory path and create new systems to help prioritize this work. And a lot of progress has been made. This slide shows a snapshot of some of the major efficient permitting tools available for fish passage and other aquatic and riparian restoration project types. Some of these were developed with Sustainable Conservation's involvement, and others the agencies have done on their own. And we want you to be aware of these so you can put together the most efficient CEQA and permitting package for your project. And using them as a project planning tool can also make things a lot easier for you down the road. So I'll be giving a brief overview of these with some tips along the way. I'll be starting with the set of tools for small projects, then moving on to larger, and then I'll talk about options for federally listed species and the Coastal Commission. And then I'll show you a place where you can get more information about all of this and other things I didn't have time to talk about today. And I won't be covering the permitting that Fisheries Restoration Grant Program provides, since Tim Chori covered that earlier in the day. The small pathways, they have been around for a while, but sometimes people forget about them because there's some other new exciting ones, but these are still generally easier and faster, and a lot of fish passage projects will fit into this category. So if you can, we recommend using these pathways. And I'll talk about them each separately, but first, just some things about project size. With that CEQA categorical exemption for small projects, they have to be 5 acres or less, but there's no linear foot limit. But for the Water Board order for small projects and Habitat Restoration Enhancement Act, there is a 500-foot cumulative linear foot limit. So just some things about project size. That project area includes all areas of temporary and permanent disturbance in waters and uplands. So that also includes your access routes and staging areas. And then that linear foot limit, it is cumulative. So if you're doing maybe some large wood augmentation along several places or beaver dam analogs, there are some tools that can help you calculate your project size. And then for fish passage projects, a lot of the time, they'll have a small area of impact and open up some, number of miles of stream or however long, but those miles are that distance of indirect benefit, doesn't count towards your project size. Categorical exemption 15333, just a couple reminders about this one. If your project is 5 acres or less, but over 500 linear feet, you can also use it with the statewide restoration general order. That's for larger projects that I'll be talking about later. And we have seen it used this way. And we also want to make sure people know about this 2021 memo from Natural Resources Secretary Wade Crowfoot. It clarified that the use of mechanized equipment or the presence of special status species does not preclude you from using it. With the Water Board order for small habitat restoration projects, unofficially called the SHRP, that is an unofficial acronym, but a lot of people use it. That's a faster, simpler process than an individual 401 water quality certification, and it also opens the door to HREA that I'm going to talk about next. If you are planning to use our HREA, if you can, it's a great idea to try to meet with both your CDFW regional staff and your regional water board staff before you submit that application to use the SHRP. We have seen most of the time when people use HREA, they go through the process where you get your notice of applicability from the water board first. So just that extra upfront coordination is a good idea. And then HREA, Habitat Restoration Enhancement Act, this was created through legislation that Sustainable Conservation sponsored in 2014. It was renewed for another 5 years in 2022, and last year it was used for 38 projects, so the most we've ever seen in a year, and it's been used for a lot of fish passage projects. Some reminders, it is for voluntary restoration projects, and the primary purpose has to be habitat restoration. You have to be eligible for that CADX and the SHRP, but you don't have to use them. So for example, you might get your CEQA and water board coverage through that FRGP program that Tim was talking about today, but you could still use HREA. And a great thing about this is that you get your lake and streambed alteration agreement and your compliance with the California Endangered Species Act with a single approval. So I was saying there's, kind of two ways. Most people are doing the 30-day process where you get your SHRP notice of applicability first. We have a guidance document and some videos that can walk you through both processes on our website, and CDFW also has some information and frequently asked questions on their website. And for now, I'll just give you a couple of tips. Of course, pre-consultation with your CDFW regional staff is really important. Meeting with them to talk about your project and engineering design for fish passage. Also a reminder to include work windows and protection measures for species like riparian birds, if that's applicable. Just don't forget about them, in addition to fish. And then Another tip is to apply for the full 5-year term allowed in HRA, just in case your project takes a little longer than originally planned. Okay, now on to the big stuff. So things for larger projects, and these are the newer ones. So some CEQA options for larger projects, if you don't fit into that CADX, the Programmatic Environmental Impact Report, or PEIR, that was developed along with this statewide Restoration General Order. You can use it for CEQA compliance by either doing some project-specific analysis to verify that the PEIR covers your project, or you can analyze only what hasn't been covered. This could be done with something like a memo to file and findings, saying all the impacts have been analyzed within the scope of the PEIR, or by doing an addendum or supplemental EIR. And what we have seen so far, everyone that's used it has taken the memo to file findings route. And then there's also the statutory exemption for restoration projects, the SERP, managed through CDFW. That's another great option. And if you're trying to figure out what to do, CDFW and Water Board staff are having these joint meetings with applicants to help you figure out which is the best option. Because there can be quite a few factors that go into that. And as many of you know, the SERP will expire on January 1st of 2025 unless the legislature extends it. So there's currently a trailer bill in the budget package to make that permanent. So keep your eyes on that trailer bill if you are interested in using SERP in the future. So the statewide Restoration General Order that I'm going to call the SRGO from now on, this covers your 401 water quality certification for federal waters and waste discharge requirements for waters of the state. So if you just have waters of the state, you can use this as well. And the purpose of it is to provide that authorization for eligible projects that don't qualify for the SHRP. And it can be used with either of the CEQA compliance pathways I talked about or any other one. It's been used with the SERP a bunch of times, as well as with that PEIR. And it's been used for 41 projects so far, including 3 fish passage projects. So if you've got a project that ends up being larger, or maybe you have multiple sites where you're doing some fish passage work, that could be a good reason to use this. And your project's going to be authorized by the regional board, most likely, unless you're crossing regional board jurisdictions, which we've seen for one project. And then in that case, they are reviewed by the state board at that state board level. So like with many things, pre-application meeting is important. That's requesting it is part of the process for enrolling under the order. And also be sure to read the whole list of steps in case you're interested in using this order. And another great thing about the SRGO is that the protection measures are coordinated with these NMFS and Fish and Wildlife Service programmatics that I'll talk about in a little bit. Now on to CDFW. If your project is too large to use HRA, there are some options thanks to the Cutting Green Tape team there, and one of them is the restoration consistency determination. This is a great option if there are species at your site that are duly listed, so state and federally listed, and not fully protected species. So you can use it with an individual project BO, the Fish and Wildlife Service PBO, and 3 of those NMFS PBOs. And our website lists all the species that the CD can be used for from those PBOs, just to make it easier for you. The first project that actually used it was a fish passage project in Tehama County. So this is in lieu of an incidental take permit. It's great. It's in 30 days, no fee, no financial assurances. So pre-consultation is crucial for this. Be sure to reach out to the Cutting Green Tape team if you're interested in using it. And if you've got maybe some species that are just state listed, or you've got some fully protected species and need some take authorization for those, the restoration management permit is a great option. It's an umbrella permit that consolidates those 2 take authorizations. Similar to the CD, there's no fee, there's no financial assurances or full mitigation. You are encouraged to use the protection measures from the Fish and Wildlife Service PBO and NMFS PBOs where it makes sense. Just trying to make everything as coordinated for yourself as possible. And once again, contact the Cutting Green Tape team if you're interested in this one. So you may have noticed that lake and streambed alteration agreement isn't in the pathways for larger projects that I just talked about. And the restoration management permit is an umbrella permit, and we're trying to, with this bill that Sustainable Conservation is sponsoring by Assembly members Calra and Mathis. This is AB 1581. The goal of that bill is to put two more things under that umbrella of the restoration management permit, and that would be take of common species and the lake and streambed alteration agreement process for restoration projects. So if you're interested in this and seeing this happen this year, contact us for more. To get involved, we'll be looking for support for this bill as it goes through the legislature later this spring and summer. And then just quickly, I'll go over, some federally listed species, starting with the ones under NMFS jurisdiction. Just to remind people, we've got these 4 PBOs administered by the NOAA Restoration Center, and they cover anadromous waters of California statewide. And I've seen them used with HREA and the SHRP. I've also seen them used for larger projects as well with the SURGO. And they generally cover a similar set of project types. The main benefit of these, you don't have to do a full biological assessment, biological opinion, just a much faster and less expensive process for your Section 7 coverage. And there's a checklist application form. Definitely, read through these, the details of each, because they're a little different. For all of them, you will need a federal nexus to access them. So that could come through that NOAA Restoration Center funding or through your Section 404 or Section 10 permit from the Army Corps. And as with many things, pretty much everything I've talked about today, pre-consultation is essential. And on our website, we've got information about all of these and who at the NOAA Restoration Center to contact about them. And then in case you're in the coastal zone, just want to remind people that there are these consistency determinations with the Coastal Commission, because we know that getting that coastal development permit can be expensive and difficult. So same with the PBOs, we want to contact the NOAA Restoration Center. And we're happy to see that the NOAA RC now has some additional staff, including someone dedicated to Southern California. And then building off the success of those NMFS PBOs, we worked with Fish and Wildlife Service, NOAA Restoration Center, the Army Corps, all the Fish and Wildlife Service programs to develop this statewide restoration PBO. It's been used for 22 projects so far. Similar to the NMFS PBOs, it's an easier process than the standard Section 7. There's a checklist application form. It includes a lot of different species, your birds, reptiles, amphibians, fish like tidewater goby. It's been used for that up in the North Coast, and even has vernal pool fairy shrimp in there. And same with the other PBOs, you need a federal nexus to use it. So that could come through funding, or your core permit. And there's also a process for late arriving action agencies like the Forest Service or others. And since a lot of you may be doing some other project types along with fish passage, we just wanted to show the whole list of project types that are included in the Fish and Wildlife Service PBO, as well as the statewide restoration general order with the Water Board. So we work to make these authorizations as comprehensive as possible and as coordinated as possible between those state and federal agencies. Now, that was a whole lot of information, and to go into detail, we'd be here all day, and we don't have time for that. So with all the many tools in the permitting toolbox now, we made this website, acceleratingrestoration.org, to have more details about all these, how do you use them, why would you use it, permit documents, application forms for some of these, and then example projects so you can see how they've been used. There's even a whole page of acronyms because we know there's just so many of those. So you can find that at acceleratingrestoration.org, and then there's a link to it on the permitting page of the Fish Passage Forum website as well. There was agency staff input for a lot of pages on this, so thanks to them for making this a collaborative process. On the home page, you can find pathways by agency. There's an introduction to permitting, and then also a link to our essential guide that we know a lot of people still refer to. It's kind of a handy table organized by agency or authority, has a lot of links in it. And then the main benefits and details of each of these are, quickly listed here for your easy reference. And then just something new on our website we want you to know about is this protection measure selection tool. You can get to through several places because it's a menu approach with these measures. You want to just select the ones that are applicable to your project, and this tool is designed to help you narrow that down. And it was also tested and reviewed by staff at the various agencies. Just an important reminder about this is that the list of measures it produces should not be considered final. You're going to need to review those, discuss them with your agency staff, make sure they're appropriate for your project, and you might want to, propose some modifications to them as necessary. And then this is the, the menu of pathways in this tool, but there's some that aren't listed that you could still use the measures for. So like the restoration management permit, the CD, the SERP, Habitat Restoration Enhancement Act, and the SHRP as well. So keep that in mind if you're using those tools. The measures from these other ones could still be useful, especially if you're using one of the NMFS PBOs as well, just to make your life easier and keep things coordinated. So each pathway has a page like this. You click a big yellow button, you filter for your needs. So whether that's project activities or species, like these, you start with guild and then go to species. And then it'll give you a spreadsheet. And I'm showing this example of an output just to emphasize again how coordinated the measures are between the SERGO and the Fish and Wildlife Service PBO, which we've heard has been really helpful. So to wrap up, just with some calls to action to encourage you to take advantage of these authorizations that put restoration on a separate regulatory path with a more efficient process, and to use acceleratingrestoration.org to learn more about all these tools, really empower yourself with information about how to use them. Also give us feedback on the website and web tool anytime. You can contact us for technical assistance and we can walk you through your permitting needs for your project. Or if you have a particular question, that's totally fine to reach out. You can sign up for our email list, get announcements. Sometimes we send out surveys through this as well. And also, we love to hear about your projects. We like to feature them on our blog, the website, our newsletter, webinars. It's really helpful for us to know what's working well, and if there's anything else that could be clarified or working better. We love to hear about both of those things. And I want to thank our funders. The Coastal Conservancy gave us a grant to do more outreach, things like this, and it took a whole lot of funders to make this effort possible. So I want to recognize them. And then with that, there's my contact information and the email for our team. And I just want to thank everyone who supports and informs our work. And thank you for your time today.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. It's obvious you guys have been really busy. That is an incredible bulk of information and options. And it seems like it's so pertinent to work with that's happening right now. Questions for Stephanie?
And I'll just put the website and web tool in the chat. But yeah, feel free to reach out later if you have questions.
Stephanie, I've got a question for you. How frequently do you guys do permitting consultations with project practitioners? Is that something that is in high demand at Sustainable Conservation?
Sometimes it seems to come in waves. Sometimes it'll be pretty quiet and then we'll get a few emails at once. So it kind of ebbs and flows throughout the year. I mean, we're hoping this website, people will come have lots of information, but sometimes it's still helpful to have someone just kind of talk you through options or some kind of, maybe a different situation you've come across and see what advice we can give.
Absolutely. And I guess I've got a question just from being a little bit outside of the permitting world. As these simplified or improved pathways are developed and used, do you guys anticipate that kind of formerly used methods of permitting are going to become less used and potentially phased out? Is that something we've seen in the past?
I mean, we do hope that using these will become the standard course of business. So, I mean, I would think just as an example for, you know, for your water board 401 water quality certification, now there's options for small and larger projects. And, you know, we made it to cover a broad category of things. So I would hope that, I mean, most, you know, it was designed to cover as many restoration projects in California as possible. And hopefully, you know, they won't be having to get that individual project 401 certification anymore. But yeah, it is the goal for this to just be the go-to for the things that they can be used for. And we don't help you fill out your applications. We can kind of talk you through some permitting options, but yeah, actually doing that part is not something we do. That's a good question.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Stephanie. Again, we really appreciate your time, and it's wonderful to see the work that Sustainable Conservation is putting into this, making this process better. And we'll all keep an eye out on the bill to permanently entrench the remind me the
yeah yeah the SERP,
the
statutory exemption.
Thank goodness for that page of acronym definitions.
Yeah, there's a lot of them. Yeah.
Okay, and if anybody has future questions for Stephanie, you're welcome to reach her at her contact information from the SUSCON website. All right, next we are going to be hearing from Trevor Kumek about the North Coast Salmon Project. Trevor, are you on the call?
I am. Can you hear me all right?
We can. Let me just pull up your presentation and we'll get started.
Great. Yeah, I asked Holly to share the presentation for me because I'm having some technical difficulties this morning, but I think we'll be able to work through it all right. Okay, am I good to go?
You are good to go.
All right, great. Well, hi, everyone. My name is Trevor Kumek. I work for the California Department of Fish and Wildlife on the North Coast Salmon Project. And I am going to tell you a little bit about the work we do today and how it may be useful to you all. So we can go to the next slide. A little overview for my talk. I'll talk a little bit about my team, North Coast Salmon Project, the main focus project we work on, which is a process called SHARP. A little bit about SHARP in action, and then where we as a team are headed next with our work. Next slide, please. So the North Coast Salmon Project, which we call NCSP, is fairly new. It was created in 2018 with kind of a broad objective of facilitating and expediting coho restoration on the North Coast, which for our intents, we've kind of defined here as between the Eel River and San Francisco Bay. That's kind of what our capacity allows us to work in. NCSP is collaborative by design. Both within the department, we facilitate collaboration between programs, and then outside of the department, we work a lot with NGOs, tribes, private businesses, landowners, and others. So, and then our main, as I mentioned, our main project is a thing called SHARP, and we can go to the next slide, and I will introduce that. So SHARP is a process, really, that was created collaboratively between CDFW and NOAA Fisheries. Its intent is kind of to use the best available science and collaboration to identify and implement really specific restoration needs in the key watersheds that we've identified. And It's SHARP is guided by a set of principles, which we call the pillars of SHARP, and we can go to the next slide to look at those. I'll kind of just briefly touch on these. So the guiding principles of this process are strength. So we want to focus on protecting and restoring strongholds or source populations that can kind of support the greater region. Community, SHARP is a collaborative community planning effort, and we know to actually see these projects get implemented, it's really important to have buy-in from all the interested parties in the region, and kind of identify the mutual benefit to everyone to do this kind of restoration work. One of those parties, it being agencies, and so it's important that this process includes agency alignment, where practitioners are clearly understanding what it is the agencies actually want, maybe are going to be more open to funding. So multi-species, although our project kind of explicitly talks about coho salmon, it's understood that the restoration recommendations we make consider all of the anadromous salmonids in our focus watersheds. And then this process, it's really important that it's driven and guided by the best available science, data, monitoring data, that sort of thing. So for decision-making, we recognize in this process that it's important to strike a balance between being decisive while still acknowledging maybe what we don't know, trying to avoid having analysis paralysis so that work doesn't get done. And then finally, focus and scale. So we want our process to focus restoration efforts in watersheds where we'll have like the highest impact, and then within those focus watersheds, be doing our work at a big enough scale that there's actually that kind of demonstrated impact. So next slide, please. So, you know, there's all these recovery plans that already exist, recovery strategies, maybe watershed planning documents, and SHARP seeks to kind of build on the existing recovery plans by firstly making really specific recommendations for where to do restoration projects in a focused watershed. It can be challenging for like a practitioner to get really specific information out of a recovery plan. And we are trying to fix that by being really specific, say, this is where the planning team has recommended that you add large wood, for example. Also, importantly, as I've mentioned a few times, SHARP is a collaborative process. It's not just agency down. And so ideally, the outcome there is the planning document that we create has buy-in from everyone that was a part of the meeting, and it's something that is kind of agreed upon from the beginning. Next slide, please. So where we have done SHARP so far, as I mentioned, we've been working on this for several years now. The first pilot effort was in the South Fork Eel tributaries, and that wrapped up, and the report, the action plan was published in 2021. Since then, we have done the SHARP process in Lagunitas Creek, the Lower Russian River, and Mendocino coastal streams. And Lagunitas is published, and Russian and Mendocino coast have finished, but the reports are still being reviewed and should be finished this year. And then there is an effort right now to get this process going in the Lower Eel River as well. Next slide, please. Oh, right. I had a little a note here. So I just wanted to point out that the SHARP process has evolved over time, and it continues to evolve. And we, from how it looks now is similar to how it looked in the South Fork Eel tributaries, but we want to be sure that we are adapting our process to be the most effective possible. So now we can go to the next slide. Yeah, so SHARP has kind of 4 main phases. I'll briefly talk about each of them. So phase 1 being the outreach and the planning for a specific watershed. Phase 2 is actually having the SHARP meeting. Phase 3 is the creation of an action plan that will summarize our recommendations that came out of the meetings. And then phase 4 is sort of the follow-up or the actual implementation of those recommendations. Next slide, please. So yeah, phase 1 is where we sort of decide, we decide a few things. So we need to figure out first, who is actually going to be a part of this process? Who are the interested parties? Is anyone that could be impacted by doing this kind of restoration work? So we're kind of building our team there, and we try to cast as wide of a net as possible to make sure that we are hearing all the voices. And then secondly, kind of going back to our focus pillar, we want to make sure we're focusing our efforts in the right areas to have the largest impact. So looking at this map here on the screen, this is the Mendocino coast. You can see there are, quite a few HUC 12 watersheds there on the map. And using a ranking process that I don't really have time to explain right now, we kind of identified about 15 of the most important of those sub-watersheds, if you will, that we wanted to do our SHARP process in. So that had to do with status of the fishery, maybe local support, land ownership, that sort of thing. And then finally, part of this this phase is gathering our available data, figuring out who the best, like the scientific experts are that are going to give some presentations in the meetings are. And then importantly, are there any data gaps that we might want to either recognize or address? Next slide, please. So then after we've done that sort of planning phase, which can be quite extensive, we get to have our meetings, which is really the bulk of this process. So for each watershed, a SHARP meeting might be several days long. We have those expert presentations given that I mentioned, where we might talk about monitoring, the latest in local restoration kind of research, those sorts of things. And then the meeting participants identify, and this is again a process that I don't have enough time to really explain, but they get together and they identify different stream habitat attributes that are limiting survival at each life stage. And they rank them basically based on what is most limiting for each life stage. So for example, maybe the meeting decides that water quantity in the stream is what's actually driving summer juvenile survival. Just an example. And then finally, the kind of the important part of this phase is identifying what specifically the recommended actions are going to be that will address those attributes. And we take really extensive notes and we make those recommendations. And then we move on to phase 3 on the next slide. And this is where we kind of, the agencies sort of take over the process again for a little bit to take all that stuff we did in the meetings and create an action plan in the form of a report. So we make an action plan for each of the focus watersheds. So in the a few slides ago with the map, we have one for South Fork Eel, Lagunitas, Lower Russian, etc. And this is where we really outline in table and map form the specific restoration actions that we're recommending. And then to kind of keep the collaborative nature of this going, we send it back out to participants for review and make sure that we've kind of appropriately communicated like what they were trying to tell us in the meetings. So we can go on to the next slide. And so this is just an example of one of the products from our Lower Russian River SHARP report, which is not yet published. But I wanted to pull this one out because this one had a lot of fish passage issues, and we're in the fish passage forum here, so I want to talk about those. But this is sort of just an example of in Green Valley Creek, we identified quite a few fish passage barriers. And so this is a map kind of summarizing what the meeting participants identified were the most important ones to address. And we got the pad IDs on there. And so, yeah, this report will be coming out later this year and can be hopefully useful to you all if you work in this region at that point. Okay, so let's go on to the next slide. Okay, and the final phase is arguably the most important, which is implementing these recommendations. You know, it's great to make a planning document, but it doesn't actually have a lot of value unless the actual action is taken, you know, based on it. So as it stands now, participants in the watersheds where we have had SHARP they're using the SHARP meetings and report to kind of guide where they're doing projects now. We've seen SHARP come up in grant applications. North Coast Salmon Project staff, a lot of our work now is spent continuing to engage with meeting participants to kind of make sure that the recommendations that they identified are still kind of fresh in their minds and are being worked on. We on the team are available to kind of discuss the SHARP recommendations and connect practitioners to either resources to you know, identify what they are in our reports, or connect them with other resources like where maybe the appropriate granting or permitting is, where they should go. And then finally, our kind of final product that we're trying to create from this is a public-facing web map, an interactive web map where anyone can go and look up where we've made SHARP recommendations and what has been implemented and funded. So if we go to the next slide, I have a little screenshot. This is a rough draft. It'll certainly look different from this once it's finished, but this is on ArcGIS Online. So you can, and you know, anyone can use it. You don't need a license or anything. So you go to this website, you can scroll around, zoom in, zoom out, and you can see we have some line features, some point features, and some polygon features. And you can click on them, and this window here, this text box is the one I've clicked on for this example. It looks like it's a barrier, and so when you click on that, it'll identify where the barrier is, whether or not it's been funded or implemented already, and maybe that will help a practitioner decide if that's the project that they want to work on. So next slide, please. So yeah, kind of in conclusion here, where are we headed next on our team? As I said, most of our time right now is spent kind of continuing to engage in our focus watersheds and hear about what work has been going on, and kind of stay connected with the SHARP meeting participants to have that sort of follow through and implementation. There's a possibility of expanding SHARP, but that is something we're just discussing right now. It's limited by our capacity on our team. And then, as I mentioned, we want to continue to improve the SHARP process by learning about what has worked and maybe what could be better about the process to be more effective. And then finally, as I mentioned on the last slide, we're working on this interactive SHARP tracker map and hopefully like a story map, something really like an easy way for practitioners and the public to digest this information. So let's go to the next slide. And this is, I just want to recognize how big of an effort this has been, both with the department and NOAA Fisheries. A lot of people have put a lot of work into this, and also our many steering team members, NGOs, tribes, timber companies, landowners. I'm sure I'm forgetting people and groups, but it just shows how many folks have been involved in this process. So yeah, we can go to the next slide, and that's all I have. I guess I want to say, here's our contact info. We really are happy to talk about SHARP with anyone, and connect you with the resources, including for Russian River, Mendocino, where we haven't published those reports yet. If you're interested in what sort of recommendations we've been making, we'd be happy to hear from you. So thanks again for having me on.
Thank you, Trevor. That was really excellent. I actually have a quick question for you. For your sort of phase 5 strategy for getting your recommendations implemented through practitioners, how much do you guys sort of outreach those to try to have those projects picked up? Or do you find that there's sort of a natural inclination for practitioners to utilize SHARP to help plan and define their projects? Or do you have to really try to advertise it?
I think maybe it's a little bit of both, because ideally these recommendations came from most like the practitioners themselves in the meetings, and so what we found is, and if anything, because some of these reports have come out maybe a year or two after the meeting happened, some of the projects have gone ahead and happened anyway, and they were kind of identified in the meeting process. So I think, yeah, a lot of them are I guess in the minds of the practitioners already, but it's kind of it's in our interest and one of our priorities to stay involved in TAC meetings and those sorts of platforms to kind of just keep it fresh in everyone's mind.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Does anybody have questions for Trevor they'd like to put in the chat? All right. Well, thank you, Trevor. I really appreciate your time and your talk. And this is an excellent focusing in of information down to recommendations and defining things based on current science and data. And that's an excellent segue into our last presentation of the day. Last but absolutely not least, we're going to be hearing from Catherine about her work in monitoring projects at Prairie Creek. Catherine, are you on the call?
I am. Can you hear me?
Perfect. Yeah, I can hear you. Would you like to run through your slides yourself, or would you like me to present them for you?
I think I can share my screen. Let me see. All right. Can everyone see this?
Yep, I can see it.
Great. All right. Well, hello, everyone. My name is Catherine Stonecipher. I'm the lead on the Prairie Creek Life Cycle Monitoring Project, and I'm going to share some of the validation monitoring we do in restored floodplain habitats for threatened SONCC coho. So we work with the Southern Oregon, Northern California Coast Evolutionary Significant Unit of coho salmon. This ESU was listed as threatened under the Endangered Species Act in 1997. A key factor limiting the abundance and distribution of this ESU is a lack of floodplain habitat connectivity. This has been identified as a stressor in nearly all coastal populations and half of interior populations. These habitats are critical for survival of juvenile coho in their first year of life because they provide refuge from high winter flows. Many of these off-channel floodplain habitats were diked, drained, or armored to convert floodplains into agricultural land for raising livestock. I'm sure that's stuff you're all pretty familiar with, but typically shared at the beginning of my presentations. So a significant investment has been made in floodplain restoration in the past 2 decades. Many restoration projects have historically lacked robust monitoring strategies, particularly those targeting biological recovery criteria for listed fish species. This has led to some concerns about the long-term efficacy of these projects, with some evidence that many might be underperforming when it comes to providing high-quality habitat for listed fish species. This is a photo from the Prairie Creek channel realignment this summer. Just a huge effort that was undertaken. And so figuring out the best strategies for evaluating fish use of restored sites is pretty challenging, but research shows that monitoring both juvenile and adult abundance and diversity at a basin-appropriate scale can help evaluate the population response to large-scale restoration efforts. So that's where our long-term population monitoring data sets can help. Working within a life cycle monitoring framework enables us to evaluate the appropriate biological parameters for listed coho and ask questions such as what proportion of the population is using the restoration site? How does their growth and survival compare to the broader population? Are they surviving and reproducing and contributing to the next generation? And what causes differences in performance across these locations? Is it a habitat characteristic? Is it predator and prey relationships? So that's the core of what we do. We use pit tag telemetry studies to produce mark recapture estimates of abundance, movement, growth, and survival. We're working within a life cycle monitoring framework using standard California monitoring program protocols. So our findings can contribute to these long-term population monitoring data sets and are applicable across a broad geographic area. So here we are in Prairie Creek, which is considered a salmon stronghold. It's dominated by old growth redwood forest and contains mostly publicly held land. On this map, you can see the extent of our CMP survey reaches highlighted, as well as some of the non-natal winter habitat restoration sites that we monitor. So we do spawning ground surveys. We operate a rotary screw trap for downstream migrant trapping season at the mouth of Prairie Creek. This past summer, we completed a spatial structure snorkel survey in Prairie Creek that informed our pit tag allocation for our overwinter survival estimation. We also refer to that as our fall tagging. And then, as I mentioned, we also do validation monitoring and effectiveness monitoring of these large-scale floodplain habitat restorations. So all of this information contributes to these long-term data sets of coho smolt and abundance. We have red estimates for over 20 years. And through pit telemetry, we can also estimate marine survival. So what you're looking at are these data sets produced by the Prairie Creek and Freshwater Creek life cycle monitoring stations through the years. For a few years, we had life cycle monitoring on Mill Creek. Unfortunately, that doesn't happen anymore, but the spawning ground surveys there are going strong. So we are so happy to contribute to these long-term data sets because it can help us evaluate the restoration response. All right, so for this presentation, I'm going to focus on the validation monitoring that we do of the Prairie Creek floodplain restoration. This is on the Oru property in Oric. This project is currently in phase 2 of construction. And it's a collaborative effort between the Yurok Tribe, California Trout, NOAA Restoration Center, Save the Redwoods League, the National Park Service, and so many others. The site is a former lumber mill where large old growth timber was milled into the 80s and 90s. Part of it was also a cattle pasture. And as the site was developed, Prairie Creek was armored with riprap, straightened, and pushed over towards the highway. This is Highway 101 that you see in the bottom right of this picture, just north of Oric, and basically transformed it into a large incised drainage ditch with little to no off-channel or floodplain habitat for juvenile fish. So the goals of this project were to address the incision and impaired floodplain connectivity by realigning and recontouring the channel morphology to increase the frequency of overbank flow events, provide winter habitat for listed salmonids, and also a really neat aspect of this project is to repair cultural and economic impacts by giving the land back to the Yurok tribe. You might have heard about that in the news recently, as well as construct a new gateway visitor center for Redwood National Park. So it's really multifaceted and multi-benefit and a huge collaboration between different groups over the past decade and is now coming to fruition. And we are so honored to be a part of it and help monitor it and understand how it benefits salmonids. So here are some images from the project design. I just want to highlight the pond up here in the upper right on this aerial image. This is called the early implementation pond, and it was constructed during phase 1 to provide an immediate benefit to juvenile salmonids. So that is the main site that we focus a lot of our validation monitoring on. I also want to point out this meander bend here. This is called the new main channel. And so previously, Prairie Creek, it made this kind of awkward 90-degree bend here by the roadside. And so the goal of this project was to move it away from the road and recontour it with a more gradually sloping channel and nice meander bend. And this was completed just this last summer. That was the image I showed earlier. But last year, this had just been constructed, so it wasn't inundated yet or accessible to fish. At least it wasn't supposed to be. But during a large overbank flow event, it actually became accessible to fish. And so we began monitoring it because they were present. And this summer, this riprap wall here was removed. And now this is where main stem Prairie Creek is flowing. It's no longer an isolated habitat. And so, yeah, really exciting, big changes, and we like to adapt our monitoring to meet the needs of the restoration project as it evolves. So our group is currently on year 2 of our monitoring grant. So I'd like to share some of the results we've seen so far. In the fall of 2022, we tagged 1,442 juvenile coho upstream in Main Stem Prairie and Lost Man Creek for that overwinter survival estimation. We sampled the EIP pond monthly from December 2022 to May 2023. We also sampled the new main channel from January 2022 when we realized that fish were in it until May of 2023. And in those habitats, we tagged an additional 422 coho. And then in the spring of 2023, we installed our rotary screw trap downstream and tagged an additional 3,242 coho there. So in a few years, some of these fish will return as spawning adults, and we will be able to estimate marine survival during and after the restoration was completed and compare that to previous estimates of marine survival through those long-term monitoring data sets. So here are some other results I'd like to share, just early bits of analysis. So on this map, you are looking at the original tagging location of fish that were later detected downstream in the restoration site here. These are either in-hand captures via seining or were detections on the portable antenna that we operate there. The larger circles represent a higher proportion of fish originating from those locations within Prairie Creek. So what you're seeing is that coho throughout Prairie Creek are using this restored floodplain habitat downstream. Most of them are using it briefly as velocity refuge, 3 days or less. That's great. That's what it was constructed for. But 15% of them use the site for more than 20 days, and some fish remain there for up to 113 days. So really exciting to see fish moving into this habitat and thriving there. This is the size distribution and growth of juvenile coho that were captured in the project site. So as I mentioned, we were monitoring the new main channel. Those are the pink box plots, and the EIP pond. Those are the green box plots. And you can see that both the size distribution and most of the growth are higher in the new main channel. That's probably because that habitat was warmer, it was shallower. It wasn't really intended to be connected in that year, but it looks like it did provide a temporary benefit to their growth during that time until May. And then I'll talk a little bit about what happened in May. This is some data from our portable antenna deployments. These are seasonal detection patterns. We operated this portable antenna at the mouth of the EIP pond and as well as the new main channel kind of intermittently. And what you see here is that there is a pulse of movement in the early winter, or late winter, early spring, as well as a pulse of movement in late spring. This is consistent with the outmigration timing of 2 distinct life histories of juvenile coho. So early immigrants using the site during outmigration in the winter, and the larger population of 1-year-old immigrants using the site in the spring. And if it's a green bar, they were detected in the pond, they were tagged in the pond. The blue bars represent that they were tagged upstream. And then we had fish from the new main channel that were moving back and forth between sites. And then a really cool aspect of this is you'll notice that there's this little red blip here. This was a fish that was actually tagged in Salt Creek in the Klamath River and was detected on that portable antenna in the EIP pond. So it had traveled 22 miles down the coastline and swam up Redwood Creek and into the EIP pond, which is pretty much an undocumented life history behavior. So it was really awesome that we captured that and we were able to detect that. But I'm also going to talk more about that later. Okay, so some lessons learned. One of the biggest lessons our monitoring crew learned during last season occurred when the water level in the new main channel dropped below the level of this culvert here. So as I mentioned, this wasn't really intended to be an accessible habitat feature, but then it was. And so we started monitoring it, and it did provide some benefit, but there was a distinct point in late May when it disconnected that fish were isolated. They were not able to leave the new main channel. And unfortunately, water temperatures were rising to near lethal levels and the dissolved oxygen was dropping. So we picked this up during our regularly scheduled monitoring, and we actually triggered an emergency fish rescue effort. We were able to coordinate with project partners over the holiday weekend. And I think this was really an excellent example of interagency collaboration. So many people came together to help remove these fish from this habitat before they perished. And I just think that it was amazing what we were able to do. So we seined and electrofished the new main channel until depletion had been achieved. And we found that seining was a much more effective method to remove fish in this habitat. We captured over 120 fish with the seine and fewer than a dozen with the e-fisher. That might have to do with the structure that was in the habitat. We did a depletion estimate after the fact, and it looks like we were pretty effective. We estimated that there were about 142 fish stranded in the new main channel at the time of the fish rescue, and we were able to successfully relocate 141 of them. And many of those were later detected downstream, either on our pit tag antenna array at the mouth of Prairie Creek or in the rotary screw trap. So unfortunate that this happened, but I think really highlights the need for monitoring and for collaboration between groups, because we were able to mobilize this massive effort and ensure that this did not impact these fish. Okay, so I'll move on to talking about this season so far. We have tagged 1,516 coho upstream in the fall. We've tagged 275 within the project site in the EIP pond, and still monitoring monthly there. And perhaps really exciting, we're working with a master's student at Cal Poly Humboldt to expand our work into other restored non-natal habitats. So we added another location in the project site this year, as well as an estuarine site. This is exciting because we are expanding into the estuary. We're hoping that this can help facilitate pre-project monitoring and inform levee setback and removal projects that are currently in the very early planning stage. So you're just looking at an updated version of that previous map. Again, fish throughout Prairie Creek are using the project site. These green circles are all the original tagging location of fish that we tagged during fall tagging in October, that over the winter, early spring so far, we have detected either in hand or on the portable antenna using the restoration site. And the larger circles represent a higher proportion of fish originating from those locations. So yeah, still using the restoration site. And this is their size distribution and growth, just an update to those previous figures. We don't have the new main channel this year because it's currently main stem Prairie Creek. But it looks like fish are still using the EIP pond, and they're growing and thriving there. They're getting bigger. We've got some seasonal differences in growth. Growth is low in November. That makes sense. It's a low productivity month. Pretty tight distribution in January. This could represent two different life histories. Again, early immigrants versus spring immigrants. So speaking of life history diversity, I mentioned earlier that we had detected a fish from the Klamath River in the early implementation pond. And there was previously a Fish and Game publication on this that was done by Jimmy Faulkner from the Yurok Tribal Fisheries Department. And I think some folks that were working on the LCM back in 2012, I could have that wrong, but they did detect 2 Klamath fish on the downstream pit tag array. So it's not completely undiscovered, but we are adding to our knowledge of it. It's a very unique and novel life history behavior. So these are fish that are out migrating in the winter at a very small size, like 70 to 90 millimeters, and traveling miles along the coastline, entering other watersheds and using non-natal habitats there. 10 fish have been documented rearing across the Klamath and Redwood watersheds since 2012. And the more intensively that we monitor, the more detections of this life history we accumulate. I think it's really exciting because the implications of this are huge as far as restoration planning. We're learning that they're using these lagoon habitats, such as Lagoon Creek. This is just south of Wilson Creek and north of the Klamath River. Many fish that were tagged in the Klamath River originally are being detected there. So yeah, you're seeing with the red squares, these are fish that were tagged in Prairie Creek and later detected in other locations, such as the Klamath River. as well as all the way down here in Martin Slough. Some of these are in-hand captures, so we know that it can't entirely be accounted for by bird predation or some other predator. Some of the Prairie Creek fish were actually captured in hand on Wallkill Creek, and we got growth information for those fish. Interestingly, one fish that was demonstrating this life history behavior grew more in 3 months than the well-documented 2-year freshwater residency life history did in like a year in Prairie Creek. So really exciting. We've captured 4 of these fish so far. And thanks so much to Jimmy Faulkner from the Yurok Tribal Fisheries Department, as well as Ross Taylor from Ross Taylor Associates. He was doing monitoring down here in Martin Slough, where he detected our Prairie Creek fish. So really exciting, and so stoked that we can share this pit tag data. All right, so I'm going to talk really quickly about the estuarine monitoring work that we are doing. I think it's relevant to that life history diversity, because if fish are entering Redwood Creek and traveling into these non-natal habitats in Prairie Creek, I think that it could be critical to restore these estuarine habitats so that they're available to use as well. So the Redwood Creek estuary is extremely impaired. It has almost no estuarine habitat that's accessible to salmonids, because it's confined in these levees from the mouth of Prairie Creek all the way down to about 100 yards from the ocean. These levees were constructed following the devastating floods of 1955 and 1964. And you can see from these aerial photos from before and after the levees were installed, we had this complex, diverse off-channel habitat available in the estuary. And this here was the original channel that, after the levees were installed, became an abandoned oxbow that we now call South Slough. We can also see Strawberry Creek here coming in on the right-hand side. This was diked and converted to agricultural land. So a large portion of Strawberry Creek was restored about 10 years ago, but we've learned through our monitoring this winter that unfortunately fish have pretty limited access to that habitat for most of the year. There is a tide gate at the confluence of Strawberry Creek and South Slough. Let's see, which on this map is right here. That prevents fish from accessing that most of the time. But sometimes they are able to access through the sandbar on South Slough, but only at the absolute highest flow events, which is a pretty short duration, short window of time. So we've been sampling Strawberry Creek and South Slough through the winter, and we're hoping that this work can help inform that tide gate operation to improve fish passage into that critical restored estuarine habitat while we wait for the larger scale levee removal. So here's what that tide gate looks like. It's closed most of the year, including during the winter time when juvenile coho are out migrating and really need that habitat. But we've been seining in the tide gate and have caught coho on every single occasion trying to access the habitat upstream. We shared this data with NPS, and they did open the gate a little early this year in March, which was really exciting. This is what the habitat looks like on the other side. So we have Strawberry Creek entering in here on the left, dumping into South Slough. You can kind of tell that the water level has dropped significantly recently, and that's because they opened the tide gate and fish are now able to access it more reliably. So we captured 7 coho inside the tide gate throughout the wintertime. Some of them were actually our tagged fish from Main Stem Prairie Creek, which to me also underscores the importance of including the estuary when you think about large-scale watershed restoration. So we operated a portable antenna in Strawberry Creek throughout the wintertime, and we didn't detect any of our tagged fish there until they opened the tide gate. We did capture 2 coho in South Slough prior to the tide gate opening. They were near the berm where they would have accessed. But again, this has been a really high water year, and this is after a really significant 100-year flood event. So I don't think it represents the majority of water years. And since they opened the tide gate, which was just a couple years ago, we've just been getting an increasing number of detections there. We're actually going out to sample it on Saturday. So I'm really excited to see what we find, and stoked for future restoration of the estuary and what that could mean for so many different populations. Really quickly before we wrap up, I just want to give a quick plug for our data management. So all of our data is stored in the California Monitoring Program Aquatic Surveys database. We have been working really closely with the Anadromous Fisheries Research and Monitoring Program at CDFW Arcata to update the database, standardize our tag-based mark recapture data. And the reason for doing this is that we feel that it will really expand opportunities for future research. If anybody wants to do work with that non-natal winter habitat sampling, life history diversity, long-term population monitoring data sets in the future, it will be available for them to use. We've also been working on developing a geodatabase of that CMP and validation monitoring data. And that started as a request from the Yurok tribe for some pre-project planning, more floodplain restoration slated for Prairie Creek, but it's just grown and I'm really excited about it. I'd love to share what we've been seeing. And I just included this little comic because it's a bit like herding cats. It's a lot of moving parts that kind of wander away, and keeping them all in the same place can be difficult, but we feel that it's really important to be good stewards of these big data sets. So just an invaluable effort. And with that, so much gratitude to the people that make this work possible. And thank you for listening today. And let me know if you have any questions.
Thank you for a fantastic presentation. Oh my gosh, this is fascinating work. And it's amazing that you guys have been capturing some like novel life history behaviors and other things that really seem to be applicable to these big restoration projects. We do have some questions in the chat. First question from Mary is, what does an EIP mean?
Oh, that just stands for early implementation pond. It just that's just the name of it because they built it in that first year. So it just became our site name.
Perfect, thank you. Next question from Zach. Have you detected or sampled juvenile coho in Skunk Cabbage Creek, a tributary to the project area, or intend to sample it in the future? And same question for Berry Glen.
Yes, so that's actually one of the sites that we added this year. I know some previous work was done in Skunk Cabbage Creek, and I think captures there overall were pretty low. It is a really tough habitat to sample, so I think that that could be part of the explanation. But oh gosh, we've tagged about 80 to 90 fish in Skunk Cabbage Creek this year, and that includes both Skunk Cabbage Creek upstream of Highway 101 and what we're calling Skunk Cabbage Slough, which is another temporary habitat feature. Part of it is going to be, or is supposed to be, filled in during this next phase of restoration, but I think that the project team is discussing not filling it in, since we are showing that it's it might be providing some pretty good habitat for fish. So another cool example of like that adaptive management, adaptive restoration, and how monitoring can inform that.
Thank you. Last question so far is if any of the tagged fish have shown up in the Klamath.
Yeah, let me see if I can go back to that map. It might not let me. Oh gosh. Yes. I still don't know if this is the best way to represent this information. I'm still kind of working with it. Oh gosh. Well,
we've all been there. It's all good.
There it is. Okay. So yeah, these red squares, these are fish that were tagged in Main Stem Prairie that were later detected in the Klamath. So they've been detected in two places in the Klamath. One of them is Wowkel Creek, where they have a pit tag antenna array as well as an outmigrant trap. And they were also detected in McGarvey Creek. So it's 4 of our fish so far this year. We haven't detected any Klamath fish in Prairie this year, but I've been waiting, and it's so fun. Last year it was the other way around, and I did not expect it to happen again this year. So I've just been so excited.
Excellent. Thank you. Any final questions for Catherine for right now? All right, thanks. I just have a few, just real quick wrap up portion. I've kind of taken stock of our thoughts throughout the day, and I've got a few slides to just kind of get us all on the same track. So some final thoughts as we wrap up our webinar today. Firstly, thank you guys for being here and thank you for bearing with us. I know it's a lot of time to devote to listening to people talk on a Friday, but we covered a lot of ground today and I'm really grateful that you are all here to be here, all here to listen. First thought would be that it seems like even after a few years of funding administered through some of these major funding opportunities, we still have these unprecedented levels of funding for restoration. That being said, the need still outpaces availability. Because of this and because of the competitive nature of funding, it's important to use all the resources available to develop your projects. Work to tell a good narrative for why your project needs to happen. Develop local support and agency support. Read the funding NOFOs and documents and meet early and often to develop those relationships and build your projects. Per Sandy's talk, while you're developing your project, it's important to do some risk analysis and put together a detailed budget justification that will help make your applications higher quality and make you a better candidate for funding. Per our sustainable conservation presentation, putting restoration on its own permitting path is a key to removing barriers for implementing these on-the-ground projects. And we thank Stephanie and others at Sustainable Conservation for their work in trying to kind of separate restoration from development in that regard. And using available tools such as those through SUSCON can help you know your to-do list to help permit your projects. Utilizing the best science available and planning your projects around restoration plans and priorities. With tools such as the recommendations from SHARP can help justify and elevate your projects based on that science and data. And then per our last talk is that validation monitoring can demonstrate the success of these restoration projects and demonstrate that habitats opened as a result from connectivity projects are utilized by our target species. Finally, as Sandy so eloquently mentioned in her talk, even though this is a complicated and a long process, they are worth it. So thank you all for being here today. And I hope to see everybody at trivia on May 24th. It's going to be a good time.